Hey everyone, we've got really special guest feature content for you today. This is a live recording of very in-depth breakdown of the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure manga by my friend Seifuu. I know it's not entirely in line with my usual content, but he was kind enough to share these recording files with me. Having watched it when he broadcast it, I knew that it was as valuable as anything that I could say, and in a space that's entirely foreign to me that I have a huge blind spot in, so I'm so glad that he was able to talk about it in a level of depth and mastery that I wouldn't even hope to be able to touch. I think if you're a big fan of breakdowns of any sort, you'll be able to get something meaningful out of this. He's very good with speaking and his ideas. So with no further ado and no more gilding of the lily, I present to you Seifuu breaks down JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, the manga.
Here is I will quickly show the focal points using these green spots here, which seems a little obvious at first, but it's important because the way, especially in JoJo, he sets up the page is he identifies the focal points, and this is like very common. You identify the focal points, the things that you want to draw, and then you create a flow of action from the things that create, for example, focus or dramatic foreshortening, and then you draw attention to those points. So on this first layer here, I'm showing these red spots. Right, this red line, there's a line of action straight to the face. So the dagger draws you straight to the face. And these dramatic sound effects, this nice curve here is creating a gentle slope up and down. And then as you come down here, you have the same thing where the dagger is pointing right down and a little inwards towards the body. And the body, it actually has some foreshortening here as well, right? So there's a foreshortening point, there's a vanishing point, all the way to the back. These are all technical terms, so I guess I should be less technical. So what's going on here, right, is it's dramatic. It's very dramatic. You have a very dramatic dagger here, which is right here big in the foreground, just big old dagger. And where is it pointing? It's pointing right at her face. Her face is like, oh my god, I'm so amazed. And then down here you have more dramatic flames and things like that, an ominous hand. It's showing more detail on the dagger that's back here. And then there's foreshortening. There's this dramatic foreshortened perspective. So I'll take off that stuff, and you can just look at the image down here, and you see how big the knees are here, right, and how small the arms are in the back, and that creates this sense of receding into the background. So it's all just to create drama and tension in this first panel. This first thing is very dramatic already. All right, move on to page 2. All right, and so again, you can see that, so again, you're getting these big ol' elbows here, and you're getting this face, this dagger, right? Breasts again. Breasts are always important in this kind of thing. And yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. And then this is just a big old spot. Yeah. So those are the focal points. And again, pay attention to the foreshortening. The foreshortening is so important in JoJo, and it's just the sense that something is, receding into the background. And again, you have the arms, they're coming out dramatically forward. The arms are coming up back like this, right? And the face is centered. The flow of the arm leads right into the face here. Right there. Right there. The action of the knife plunging is another line. A really big line. Go straight to the breast. All right. So what all this stuff does when you create like a vanishing point, you create a perspective where like something disappears into the distance. I'm going to boom. So this is This is a vanishing point, right? Same thing. So the car is receding into the distance, right? Or the road is receding to the small point. It's getting smaller in the distance. And what that does is it creates a sense of motion, a sense that you're being drawn towards the horizon. And Araki does the same thing here when he draws your attention to the back. He's creating a sense of motion. So there's like a sense of motion here. Your eyes are drawn back up here, and then they come back down with this dagger. So it actually creates motion, even though he's standing still right in this pose. You get the sense that it's swooping up and then down with the dagger. And then, of course, it follows through in this panel because the dagger is then plunged. So you get this sense of swooping motion and boom, plunge right into the focal point of the breasts. Right, the titillation, no pun intended or pun intended, because that's like, it's the money shot. It's the violence and it's the sex and violence. So you create anticipation and then plunge. And this is important because JoJo in general, but especially, visually and narratively, is all about anticipation and payoff. It's all about, like you build up this really great sense of tension and then you pay it off with this amazing sense, this action sequence or this sexy sequence. And so you can see that happening in the art here. You get this sense of tension and then boom, plunging in. Drama we see here. I could talk a little bit more about the actual technique of the way he draws these images, but right now I'm just talking about the stuff he's implementing to get you excited about what's coming up next. Let me know in chat or whatever if you want me to go into any detail about any of this stuff. Otherwise, next double page. Alright, so this page here, let's quickly outline the focal points again. So you can follow along at home if you want to. Boom, boom, set that up. So we have this, eyes. So eyes are focal points for humans. Anything that looks like a face is focal. So you can actually make the whole body look ridiculous, but as long as the face is somewhat like compelling, people will forgive it because their eyes are naturally drawn to the face as a primary feature. So everything else can be sort of like weirdly proportioned, but you have the face. Boom, boom, boom. So, and by the face, I mean just the shadows of the eyes, like two eye holes. Like you can see two eye holes and a mouth is enough to make people think it's a face. And that's enough. So, same thing here. Let's look real quick at what the lines of action are. Again, I wish I had my pen. I could do it a little faster, but whatever. So, there's a curve here. Again, it's important to note that this is receding, right? So it's swooping here, swooping in, and then it cuts back here. And all of the stuff, it swoops here, and it cuts back here. This is something that people don't recognize, I think, a lot about Araki's work, but it's actually, there's so much motion in here, just in the pen. Like, he does this all in one line. So if I take away my crude blocks, you can see he draws these in one swoop. He goes swoop, 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 and you read motion into it. So this whole thing already feels like there's motion going on with these tendrils popping out of the stone mask, which of course is, and then they're moving quickly. It's like this tentacular motion, right? They're like tentacles, and then they come back into the head back here. And again, it's all because he primes you. So he primes you with a swooping motion, swooping motion, swooping motion. You're like, what is going on here? They're swooping, and oh yeah, they're all swooping into the back of the head here. That's like the crucial payoff is like, and then they come back into the back of the head. These are kind of boring panels, honestly. It shows the body, it shows context, but like I think they're just filler panels. It's okay. I mean, it's like chapter 1, whatever. They're drawn well. There's like shadow, there's all that kind of stuff, but it's not really important to the sense of drama. This again here, pay attention, foreshortening. So there's the focal point. I should actually, whatever you get. There's a focal point on the finger there because it's the furthest point to the front, and everything else is here. This is the general shape of the hand is this box, right? You notice how the sides here peel back a little bit because again it's giving you a sense of receding in space. It pulls you back. The vanishing point is somewhere around this guy's face, and again, remember, you want to draw attention to the face because people like looking at the faces, and so you create this motion from the foreground here all the way to the background, the vanishing point on the horizon, which is the face. So again, he's doing all this to create a sense of motion, a sense of drama, a sense of interest, because this is kind of earlier on where there's just like this is a lot of exposition, right, for like pillar men and stuff. This is like 4 pages so far of just like random stuff, no context, so he has to create a sense of drama to get you compelled in the story. Oh, and I have not been discussing real quick the panel stuff. So just to get you a sense of looking at panels, so that you understand how to look at panels. Oh, I can just change that. Yeah. So look at the, what the hell? What? Just a single? Really? One rectangle like that? It just does one rectangle? That's the worst. All right. Forget that noise. We'll do a polyline. I'll do it real fast. Okay. Yeah. So just to put a little filter over the top, and then you can start seeing how the panels work. And I'll hide the other stuff so it's easier to see. Yeah. And this is important because the length of a panel, right? So the width of a panel is how long of time it takes. In anime or in anything with a fixed frame, this is a huge issue. This is why a lot of anime has pacing issues, because you cannot adjust they rarely adjust the frame. And in comics, there's a lot of fine-tuning of a sense of time just by using the width of a frame, because that's how long it takes your eyes to scan across it. So if you have a wider frame, it will take your eyes longer to scan across it, and you will actually perceive that moment in time as longer. That's why establishing shots in manga, just like establishing shots in movies, have a lot of horizontal movement. So you see, this is really quick here. So we'll zoom in a little here. So just look at this little 3-panel sequence, right? It's quick because the action is quick. The swoop is quick. The swoop is quick. It wants you to get into like a sense of quick action, and then it slows down a little more so that you start to go, what am I looking at, right? Here, he just wants to give you a sense of what the motion is, and then he's like, well, what am I looking at? And then the big reveal here is, oh, you're looking at a mask, just plunging into someone's head. So, and that's also why I said this panel is like not that important, because it's just a zoom out. It's a zoom out, and it's small in space. It's not meant to be read for a long period of time. He's just giving you a little context. Whereas this one, notice that it's wider because he wants to give you a look. He wants you to read longer. He wants you to read longer and look at this dramatic pose. I finally obtained eternal life. All right. Anything else about this page real quick? The framing here. This is something that Araki will get better at later on, and that a lot of mangaka take time to get confident with. But there's a nice central composition here, right? So you look at the let's see, yeah. So just to give you a little, you have this 2 flames. Peel up the opacity a little bit. You have 2 frames, and then boom. So there's a central symmetry here, and it just creates a nice composition. It's just a nice little composition for the panel there to stand out. And it actually, symmetry like this stops a sense of motion as well. So he wants you to sort of be halted at this panel right here. Again, if you're reading really quickly, it might not come out this way, but that is the intent of the composition. All right. Next, double page. So, all right. Focal points. Let's look at here. Obviously, you got a focal point on the face. That's just like focal point on the eye. Again, any facial features people are going to focus on. Anything that looks like a face is going to be a focal point, even if you don't want it to be. So it's careful to look at how you're doing your shadows. It's important to be careful about how you do your shadows. All right. Yeah, we'll just go and then throw down the panels here. So I mean, here again, you can get a sense of foreshortening. Yeah, actually, this would just be the main topic for the early Jojo chapters. Is just look at all this foreshortening. I mean, the hand is receding here, right into the foreground. Gives you a sense of drama. The face swoops up here. So this is important. So like when you look at fan art of Jojo, or when you look at how to imitate Araki stuff, a lot of people take this very piece by piece approach because it looks statuesque. It looks like very harsh. his stuff looks very, especially the early chapters, they look very rough, but there's actually a lot of flow going on. So if you look at the flow of motion from the hand up here to the face, there's actually a continuous line of motion. And that's something that you would like to imitate when you're doing, you know, a Rocky style stuff. And it's part of, later on, he does all these like weird ass poses and things, like the poses he's famous for, they come from the same kind of line of motion. So even now in the beginning, right before he's doing all of his really dramatic posing stuff, you get a sense that he's creating motion, or at least I get a sense, and I'm trying to illustrate to everybody else. So same thing here, foreground. Notice here there's a line of motion here in the shin, because human shins curve. That's a common beginner mistake if you're drawing from those wooden figurines, is you tend to draw the leg and the limbs and stuff as like these cylinders, but they actually have a curve in them. This is just a Fist of the North Star panel. This is not something that I think that comes up a lot again later in Jojo's stuff, because it's just an image of a stone platform with a cut in it, and you do have a little bit again of that foreshortening if you examine the boundaries of the platform, right? So the plane extends to there, but it's not that dramatic, and he adds the smoke here, and it actually detracts, I think, a bit from that sense, and it just I don't think he was doing it very consciously. There's a gash there to create visual interest. Again, if you notice, it's really interesting. This comes from the rear plane. So he's doing that, you know, even subconsciously, he's drawing to give you a thing that clues you into the foreshortening. Because he's all about that drama, baby. All about that drama. And real quick, just take a look at these panels, right? So, panel. There we go, first panel. So that's the filter. Panel. Yeah, and then they'll just, I mean, you get the idea. You can just look at, it's just to get you to look at the blocks overall, right? Not the individual images so much as the blocks going on, because again, small, large, right? Small, large, small. It creates a rhythm, and that's what he wants to do. He wants to clue you in with these small, little, exciting, like, ooh, what is that? They're veins. Oh, what's going on? Oh my God, it's an eye. Like, he does these close-ups, these little small close-ups to build a quick rhythm where it's like small, big, small, big, dun, dun, kung. It's the same thing as the sound effects that you often see. That's why you get these cuts to these big panels where someone's posing as a go, because he builds up the tension by doing these small rhythmic panels beforehand, and then boom, he just drops you with these larger dramatic panels, and it gets, you know, that small, large pattern is repeated throughout this whole manga's run. Honestly, which image is that? That was 4? Okay, so, alright, this is, again, setup. So, polyline. Okay. So, faces, right? Look for focal points. So, to be more clear about focal points, right? Focal points are created by what people naturally look at. That's why faces are always a natural focal point, because people are always naturally drawn to identify and look at faces. And the other way in which you can create focal points, right, you can draw people's attention to things, is through that foreshortening, as mentioned. So anything that's in this general area of this panel is going to, you're going to look at this, because that's where the lines are drawn to. Like you can see it by looking at the floor, because he drew the wood grain, and what those wood grains are actually. This is a thing that artists do. So the more you learn about like art fundamentals, the more you can see this in different people's art. But there are these little like they like to draw things that are like, this is a basic perspective line technique. You're drawing lines to the vanishing point here, and here he just literalizes it as wood grains. But you know, he could just draw those lines to give him a sense of what the angles are for this room, for like the wood beams and things like that. It's got to be a little larger so you can see. yeah. So like, see, the wood beams are like doing this, and then the wood grains are doing this on the bottom, right? And you could actually draw the room with just those lines, just like that, and then fill in the details, which end up being wood later on. There's a pole here actually because it creates contrast with that sense of motion. That's another little art technique for you. You draw one thing vertically cutting through the sense of motion there to not make it so constantly like you're swinging back and forth, to give you a little bit of stability. The rest of it is, again, he does the he does small, large panels here. So let's talk about this little 3-panel sequence here real quick, because what's important for this 3-panel sequence is that the spacing between them is even. And when you do that in comics, you do that because you want to read it very rhythmically. You want the same amount of time to be implied between each panel. And this is actually, in the anime, this is very obvious because they really like hammed up this sequence. But even this sequence alone, the way it's drawn, where he has the Dio, this is Dio's introduction, and he has the book open like this, and he goes, oh, and then poof, and he closes it with a little path. This sense of fully open to fully closed, this timing makes him already kind of seem like cocksure. Like he's already like, oh, like he's fed up because he's very brazenly, very directly closing this book because it takes this amount of time. And the amount of time it takes is implied with the spacing between these panels. Like just in this 3-panel sequence alone, right? If you really zoom in on it, you just get a sense that it's like, fully open, fully closed, face, and it all takes the same amount of time, and it creates this sense that Dio is a very controlled, very very poised individual, which is a characterization that he maintains throughout the entire comic. And of course, closed eyes, that's a common signifier of that as well. Oh, look at that, it's another foreshortened hand that's reaching out towards this. Right, or I should just make it really clear, right? So boom, boom. So, and where is it reaching towards? Oh, look at that. It's a focal point. The focal point is the book. So you can look at who's holding the book, right? And it's the book. So this is important too. In this, so the reading flow of this, because it's manga, right? It goes 1, 2, 3, 4. And what happens here is because he uses the hand to draw your attention to this book, in the next panel he shows a close-up of what is the same scene. So if you're reading consciously, right, if you're reading like the way he wants you to read, it will feel like you're zooming in on the book. Even though this panel, right, the book is very small, you should have picked up on the fact that there's a book in this panel because of the hand pointing towards the back. I'm not saying you're a bad reader if you don't. I'm just saying that's what he's trying to get you to do by doing all this stuff. And fun fact for you like Araki fans, this is actually a compositional thing he used in his one of his one-shots. If you look at his book about gambling or something, this thing where there's a guy sitting in a chair, there's a hand pointing to the back, and the guy's holding something in his hand, and then he zooms in on the thing in his hand. Yeah, that's a little Araki trick there. This is a little Joe joke, right? This is probably a reference to something. This name, Gorgeous Irene, just a little call out there. All right, so again, and look at that. What's back over here? Oh my God, it's more foreshortening, right? Oh my God, look at this hand. It's foreshortened. So much foreshortening, all over the place. It's like all he does to create drama. In the early parts of this manga, he really does, because remember, he's still relying on someone else's art style, right? On Fist of the North Star's art style. So he's adding his own love of foreshortening, although Fist of the North Star had that too. But that's what he's adding in there. Okay, so we are going to get back to focal points. Establish the focal points. It's a face. That's a face. Here's a thing. You care about that. Whoops. Oh God. Except I got to do it on new thing so I can show you what's underneath. Boom. Boom. Oh, that's gorgeous, right? Look at that. You got that guy there. Check that dude over there. This one's interesting. I'll talk about that in a second. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, real quick, this is a face. This is in the foreground. So this is let's see real quick. Does he do anything? Yeah. So this is something common in manga because they use a lot of heavy black ink. That they do white outlines around the black ink so that they can distinguish between the foreground and the background. Because it's actually, if you try this at home, right? If you draw like dark outlines on everything, it can be hard to distinguish between the foreground and background using just black and white. You have to use digital tones, or you have to use like really conscious physical tones in order to make that distinction. Or you can just do what they do here, which is you add a white outline around things that are in the foreground, and it actually sort of is a cartoonization of the way light bends around forms in the foreground, but that's kind of an excuse. It's really just because it's hard to like freaking differentiate between things if they're all connected by black lines. So this is pretty standard manga stuff. You know, his face close up on the focal point of the earlier panel here. Boom, boom. You know, this is again, you have foreshortening as well, right? Here's the hand. Does that. That's why the hand is all big in this panel here. This panel here is all big. This early rendition of Dio, by the way, fun fact, is basically Araki's early character, Cool Shock BT. If you look at the manga, he draws. He's sort of the protagonist of his earlier manga that's now the antagonist. This is cool. So instead of just drawing the face here, because he could have done face, right? He could have done, here's a face, here's a dramatic face. He added in this letter that you've already established from here earlier, just to give a greater sense of depth. So now you have two planes, right? You have, you know, this plane here, which is the foreground, and then you have this plane back here, which is the background. And it's just like a small little detail, but if you look at it, it does create a little bit of sense of depth. So you get the sense that he is there's depth in this scene. It's not just like this panel here, for example, like this. There's no physical sense of depth. There's no foreground and background here. There's no like sense of space. It's just a focus on his face. But here, it's like there's an actual sense of space just because the hand is in the foreground. Just a little bit though. It's not like super. Yeah. And here in this panel, you see again that example of what I was talking about. You see the white bits around the black bits here. Of course, here he uses it because it's a flashback, but it's also just to differentiate between two different images, so that it doesn't look like one's bleeding into the other, or that you have like a face carved into a mountain or something like that. You'd be surprised how easy it is to just make something that blends together. This one I was gonna say. So this one's interesting because he does have, again, that's the vanishing points that I talked about. That he does all the time, right? And the vanishing point is actually, right, it's here. Whoop, there you go. It's like there. Yeah. And this is something that I think better manga artists do, but I think more aware manga artists do, is so he has rain here, which is also functioning as those dramatic speed lines, the classic speed lines, and it's also functioning here as lines of foreshortening. It's creating perspective lines, right? Dramatic lines towards the vanishing point, and you can tell this is intentional too, because you look at what these shapes are here. They're cliffs. They're the rocks of the cliffs, and he's drawing them like you can see this shape here is like that, right? And then here's the rock up here. So he's actually drawing these out. He's drawing these like these cliffside columns like this but because he inked them really heavily, I think this was, he inked them a little too heavily, or he didn't really sort of have a good he didn't decide on how the rocks were going to look beforehand, so it kind of got muddied up a bit. So he added in the white after the fact on top of it to create a greater sense of depth. And actually, what I think is doing most of the heavy lifting here, and this is something that he did a lot earlier, a lot of the time earlier in his manga, when I don't think he was as like confident about the forms he was drawing, is he used light to create focal points when he wasn't sure about how the actual underlying forms and stuff were working. So right here, right. If this panel were very light, you could see that it would draw your attention here, but because it's dark, it just looks very like blackish around here. So he made this part really light so that you really know you're supposed to be looking at this carriage. Obviously, it's the only thing in this panel, but you need a little push in that direction nonetheless, especially if you're going through real fast. This is really detailed. This is like dark future homeless Speedwagon was early Dio Brando dad design, right? But again, just look at how when he takes it. So Araki talks about he published in his manga that he always tries to push himself when he's drawing. He doesn't just draw what he can, but he tries to draw a little more than he thinks he can, so that he pushes himself to grow. And again, he creates just like in this panel over here, where he creates a foreground and a background by putting this hand in front. He does the same thing here. So you have the reaction face, and then he draws the hand and the ridge here just to create a little sense of depth, to put this scene in a specific sense of place. And younger artists, amateur artists, if you're out there, if you want to draw like JoJo stuff, be aware of that, because younger artists and laser artists and amateur artists, I mean, again, it's not a fault of character, but it's just something to look out for, is you might just nail like the face and the gesture and then walk away and say, oh, that's all that matters for the panel. But just by going that little extra distance and adding in just the little bumps of the hand and this ridge, it goes a long way to creating a sense of place for the scene, a specific sense of like that this is taking place in a certain place. And again, this is something that Araki leans into later on a little bit more. But so we established that there's the lines are coming down here, right? You're going down towards this carriage. Well, he reverses that here to do the vanishing point is now at the top of the script. It's actually that looks like Erina, but it can't be, right? Because this is the past. It's his mom, right? I don't know. Well, in any case, all the characters look the same in the early chapters, right? But in any case, so she's the focal point, and she's the vanishing point actually here. But the point is that now it goes up. So you go down, and then you swing up. And that swinging down, swinging up motion is a great way of how gesture and foreshortening in comics can give you a sense of motion in a static medium. Yusuke Murata, who does One Punch Man, is really, really good at this. That's why it feels like everything is moving. But, Araki knows this stuff too, and he's doing this early on, again, to create a sense of motion and excitement and drama, because that's his like philosophy for making manga, is like it's all supposed to be dramatic and intense and fun and emotive and suspenseful and all these things. So he wants you to feel it. He wants you to feel everything. Pointing out this little panel because this is a thing that earlier manga did that I think they do sometimes, still not as common, but they do these little reaction panels. They do these little faces in these little panels, and it just creates a bridging moment, because this sequence is done by itself. This little like sequence is done, but it's like a what's a non-technical music term for it? It's just like a little flourish. It's just like a little like phase here to give you a little break. It cuts through the density of the drama by just having this little boop, this tiny little face here, and it's a little fun little reaction face, and it's a good way to cut through some of the more serious drama that goes on, especially because this is the next panel, right? So if it went straight from this, drama, swooping up cliffs, jumping down, drama to drama, I mean, it's a little heavy, it's like a dense chocolate cake. You need a little citrus and then a little orange to cut through a little bit. But yeah, let's do those. Let's just quickly lay out the focal points as per usual. That's like a little bit mini point. That's an interesting one right there. We'll talk. He does that later on in part 6 a lot. But it's really interesting because when someone gets famous and you look at their work later on and you go, oh my god, like, oh, I can see even back then, like, they knew what they were doing, and like you can see all the decisions they were making and what they were paying attention to, and like that's not really, I don't think that's true. I think artists develop their voice as they continue to produce stuff. So at this point, you can identify stuff that shows up in later JoJo parts, but I don't think Araki was trying to do those things. It's something that that stuck with his style and then eventually developed because he kept doing it over time. And that's important to remember because it's the difference between someone who was born a genius and someone works themselves into becoming an artisan. So, all right. Boom. I mean, this is, again, faces, but also really intense violence. So this is something that I really like about JoJo that I don't think is necessarily captured well in the adaptations, in the modern David production adaptations, because of the way they do the art. But there's a lot of really intense grotesqueness, and that's intentional because it's one of those things, again, Araki's constantly trying to grab your attention. He's trying to grab you by the shoulders and say, oh my god, and you're like, what? And he shows you this image. And so he really goes in hard on this sort of grotesque, like almost like super deformed wax figure face, where like this dude has been impaled by a spike, like this gruesome, really just leaning into that. And it's just like, wow, I can't look away. You're fascinated by it. It's like sex and violence, right? Well, this is the violence. It's not just the fun and drama of violence. It's actually like this kind of grotesqueness of violence that draws you in. And if you notice, what does this remind you of from the beginning? That's right, the daggers, right? So he does this again, the pointing things. He likes to point and create drama, although he didn't really do it here, but nonetheless, you'll notice that he uses these pointing, he's just doing these lines to be dramatic, and then he makes them into literal things. He makes them into like a stake. He's like, oh my god, here's like this thing plunging through the panel, and it's a stake in this case. It's this hard line plunging through the composition. This is cool. This is what I was just gonna say. So in part 6, he does this a lot. He leans into the golden ratio stuff. Comes from this part here, where he starts even now to notice the power of when you use. So this is why comic panels aren't generally circular. This is like something that's like not very well discussed, but like you don't see a lot of circular comic panels because circles in images, they sort of trap the eye. They create like a little vortex. I know it sounds like pseudoscience stuff, but it's actually legit. Like, it's why Family Circus panels are all like one single circular panel, and they have like this sense of almost timelessness. And then people who hate it think it's really saccharine, and people who like it are like, oh, it's like this, this sense of Americana timelessness, because they're circular panels. And when they're circular, the eye just kind of goes around in this. It gets trapped in this image, and so it's like it's almost like a hypnotic kind of thing. And he is doing this here because that's why this is a focal point, because it's like this circle here. And it's interesting to note that the body doesn't cover the central part of the wheel here, because again, it creates circles that really draws your eye in. And again, this is, I think, because Araki just is a fan of fine art, so he learned from looking at a lot of fine art and manga, but so he tries to like consciously or unconsciously imitate some of the classic aesthetic and compositional tropes that are common in fine art, like using circles to draw your attention and keep your eye trapped in there. This is a really goofy little panel here, so this is fun. Comics do this sometimes. Again, this is like the face, it's a comedic effect. So this is to cut the drama. Again, the face is really dramatic. It's like, oh my god, this is really grotesque. But in order not to freak you out, you get this little guy popping in from an ambiguous, scene. He just pops in and say, whoa, and it's just like this funny little acontextual thing. When you make things acontextual, right, like this face doesn't have a context. There's no sense of place. There's no sense of, anything but his reaction. Same thing with this. He's not standing on a specific ground. He's just popping into the panel to say, oh, hey, what's going on? And it lightens the mood a little bit. And you see, he's doing this again too. It's this really grotesque scene of, violence, but death, and like disfigurement and all this stuff. And to sort of lighten it just a little bit, he has a clown, essentially, a commentating character who's like, oh my god, look at that, haha, it's so funny. He's like a comedian literally in the scene. This is and so you notice when he wants, and so this is a great example, when he wants to come back into literal space, when he wants to bring the drama back in and move the plot forward instead of just showing all these grotesque images of torture, right? He places the character in the scene again by having a foreground image and a background image, foreground, background. He brings you back into that sense of space. So when you want to go with jokes, make the character look flat and make them come out of nowhere. When you want to place them back in the scene, do foreground, background. That's the way he does it, at least, because he plays around with depth. That's the way Araki does it. This is a really cool panel compositionally. It's hard to do it really quick with this mouse to show why, but real quick, it's just like you have... Yeah, I can do this. She's central. She's dividing the panel into like 1 quarter and 2 quarters here. So it's like this really nice 1, 2, 3, 4 division. It's like this. It's, what would you call it? I mean, it's just it's a common compositional trope to divide something into 1 segment and then 3 segments. And when you have 4s, it's like 1 and 3. It's like a nice 1-to-3 ratio. It's like the golden ratio stuff. It's just a nice thing to look at. So her coming through the panel, her stopping point is actually right there, and that's intentional. She's drawing your eye to this point here, which divides the panel into 3s. You have something down here and something up here. These are all just to create a sense of visual rhythm. This is like more artsy stuff that, again, it's just, if you look at classical compositions, if you look at like a classical painting, especially ones that are drawn wide like this, where the eye is supposed to pan across and take its time to read, because again, horizontal, sense of time. These compositional tropes make it really pleasing to the eye to look at. It just makes it nice to look at, even if you're reading it really quickly. Yeah, and if you notice, he's not doing the foreshortening as much here because the drama is already inherent to the scene, right? He doesn't need to lean even more into it because they're already getting this sense of like, oh my god, it's this horrific carnage, it's this wreck. You don't need to go even harder on it. Although he could, and he does later on. I mean, don't get me wrong. He goes even harder on the drama, which is, it's Jojo in a nutshell, going hard on the drama. I should have done, well, this is important here to just look at eyes. Remember, focal points. You can just draw the eyes peeking out. Oh my god, it's the focal point, and people pay attention to it. Oh my god. And you can do this. He does this later on more when he leans even more into horror. And this is why Jojo is called horror, even though I think the anime doesn't do a great job of showing you why. People think it's horror because it's grotesque at some points, but the manga especially, Araki uses these cinematic tropes of suspense that he learned from reading like Alfred Hitchcock's Guide to Filmmaking or whatever. And one of those things is he does this, right? Like, you notice that this is a common thing. This is like a creeper thing. If you think of memes, right? Just the eyes peeking out over a ridge, because humans can identify a face just by like this little brow and the eye shape here. And it's enough to go, what is that? What is that thing? And you go, I want to know what that is. It's like, it draws your attention to it, focal point. And then, boom, the full reveal is, oh, it's this big mask, So, again, he sets you up with the tension. He sets you up with the what is that? And then the boom, that's what it is, right? Nani sore, nani? And then, poof, this is not as, he doesn't have the trademark really big sound effects, but it's basically the same concept. This stuff is all just reaction faces. This is just manga stuff. This is just like, in manga, when you don't really have something definitive to place into a scene and you haven't really blocked it out. Blocking is the concept in comics and in film when you place actors in specific places on a scene. When you haven't blocked out stuff specifically, like when you don't want to say like, oh, he's standing 2 feet away and then he leans in or stuff like that. Manga does this a lot too. You just show close-ups on faces because it gives you more emotion in the scene, and then you don't have to worry about where someone is in relation to somebody else. And then you can actually, if you get someone hyped up enough, like here, right, the face is so dramatic, you can just cut directly to like a hand grabbing a hand, and regardless of whether that's actually like the correct pose for how George Joestar, that's the dude, it's the dad's name. This guy, he's passed out on the ground, and so what's happening in this scene is this guy's robbing him, right? He takes his ring, and I'm not sure if this is the correct angle, right, to draw for this hand grabbing that hand, but it doesn't matter because he's already taking you so close in and established the drama of the scene that all he has to show you is this little close-up here, and it doesn't really matter whether it's physically correct or not. And this is true in cinema as well. Movies do this too. That's what they do when they do pickup shots and stuff like that is, they have an establishing scene, and then if it's close up enough and they establish like what's going on, it actually doesn't really matter if it's even the same, like you can use like a different actor and show a close up or something like that. It doesn't matter because the brain fills in the gaps. So in Araki's case, again, he relies really heavily on emotion to fill in the gaps and to bridge it. He really focuses on the reader experience, the emotion. And that's common to manga in general, but Araki takes it to like a whole level of, Jojo. The Jojo level. In the panel composition stuff, I'm not really mentioning because, again, it's just like small, small, big, small, 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 big. He uses the big panels are just the reveals, and the small panels are just building up little things. And again, I think personally this is because early on he hasn't decided what he hasn't set up the scenes as specifically as he'll set them up later on. Like in later parts of JoJo, you really do see him being very precise about every single panel image, but in the earlier stuff like here, I think he's really just drawing out a sequence in his head of like a horror sequence. So it's just small, small, big panel, small, small, big panel. You have these nice little wide panels every now and then to break up the intense flow of action. But those could even be contributions from his editor making those decisions. It's not even necessarily him. So this is a good opportunity again to talk about what he wants you to focus on and when he uses large panels versus small panels. This is really funny. That's like an old school Japanese, like old Japanese. Everyone thinks of manga nowadays as like really serious and well drawn, but back, Astro Boy and previous, right? That era, it used to be much more comedy. Like these faces, these little faces. The cartooning was much more common in a very small abstract form. In any case, these panels are not great. But so here, right, the panel is really, really big because this is really, really important. So he's drawing you in there. He totally drew this and didn't think it was dramatic enough because, again, Araki really wants you to get the drama at all costs. At all costs, he's like, what matters is the drama. So he increases the drama by adding these big hands in here. These just big ol' hands. It's not like there's no reason, right? The hands aren't really doing anything in particular. It's what it is literally in the scene is it's Dio, or what is his name? Diego. The dad's name is like whatever, Drunk Brando. All right, Drunk Brando pulling his hand back from George Joestar's hand over here, Papa Joestar's hand. This is Papa Joestar's hand and this is Brando's hand, but it doesn't matter because what's important here is that hands are expressive. Hands are an expressive part of the human body. Hands and faces are really like the most expressive parts of the human form, and just by showing hands and faces really big, people will pay attention, and you just get a sense of like drama and expressiveness because you're like, oh, someone's expressing something, and I wonder if this is because he loves like Italian. Maybe that's why he loves Italian stuff. But like Italians gesture with their hands, and it comes off very expressive, and it's for similar subconscious reasons essentially. In any case, all right. So large panel here, foreground. Oh, so this is a good example of what I was talking about earlier. You can see the importance of adding white outlines to really heavily inked panels because this was initially hard for me to understand this panel, and maybe it was for you as well, because there's no white outline here on the foreground hand, so it looks kind of like these hands are on the same plan, which they're supposed to kind of be physically, but it just comes off as kind of confusing because Araki is not an expert at foreshortening at this point in time. Like the gesture is actually kind of incorrect. Like the forms are actually kind of incorrect here on the hand. So let me just show you real quick. If you were looking at the Joestar hand, right, and you're looking at how it's supposed to be, so this is where the hand is right here. And if you are doing correct muscle groups, like that's kind of the forearm, that's kind of the bicep, that's kind of the shoulder. But the way he has it is there's the shoulder, there's like the arm, and you can actually, or actually it's like there, and you can actually see this because that's what these white things are outlining. They're outlining the side of his arm, the side of his jacket, and so it creates a weird sense of screwed up foreshortening. But the point of what I'm telling you is that this foreshortening is incorrect, and he could have fixed it, and he does later on by adding a white outline around here just to create a difference in the foreground and background. But he, in his head, wanted to, because the correct thing would be these hands being on the same plane. They're touching hands. They're still like, the hands are still like right next to each other, like right here. So he wanted that to be here, but it makes it look confusing because the foreshortening is wrong. And here, right, he does do that again, like he does with the faces. He leaves white space between the foreground image, which is the face, and the background image of the drunk Brando falling back, so that there's no ambiguity about them being on different planes. There's no ambiguity about this being a different image than this image. It's not like some weird like chimera hand like up here a little bit. Also, some of this stuff could be the scan quality, just a little bit, like like, I mean, it's literally just that. Like, people, I think, don't realize how much the scans flatten out the tones and make things a little harder to read and look at, especially in these kinds of scans of older manga. They're usually a little bit worse. In any case, focal points, classic focal points, Again, so this is something you'll see later on in Araki's work. He likes to do these big ol' eyes. He likes to do these gaping eyes towards some unknown horizon. And again, for drama, you always, that's the key phrase with Jojo is drama, and not just narrative drama, not just people being like surprised or something, but literally just, how do I draw an eye that's even more dramatic, and it's opened, it's like, look at that, it's in like, gaping reverence of something, it's beholding something, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's like this dude is like way out there in drama, enraptured, he's just taking it to a whole another level of like intensity. In any case, these panelings are nice because you have the big panel, which is the focal point. You have this little one here, and it really focuses on Papa Joestar's personal story, which is what's compelling about the scene. This page is not, I'm not big on this one. I'm really not big on this one. So this is like a common mistake too among like amateur comicers and stuff, is you just draw panels. You just like, you're telling a story, so you just draw the plot in panels, but the panels themselves aren't, they're all kind of similar size, and it's weird because it just creates it makes everything feel like it's all supposed to be the same importance, and they're not. Like, not everything's supposed to, like, look how intense this is because this panel is bigger, and and this panel is bigger, and this panel is bigger. Like, oh my god, you're really focusing on his drama scene, and this panel, everything's the same, pretty much the same size, so it's hard to know how important this is. How, is this a really noble gesture? Is this him really caring, or is he just kind of sad, and that kind of thing. It's whatever. Shading here is just because he likes being dramatic. Again, dramatic shading, dramatic day, dramatic shade. There's not much to say about these panels. They could be found in many, many, many comics, and in fact, they are. But that other page was pretty dope. So let's check out. Oh, see, that's what I'm talking about. This is what I'm talking about here. Now we're getting some dope paneling, and we're flashing back to. Or I guess we're flashing forward to the present. Yeah, flashing forward to the present. Here. So this is what I was talking about earlier too, right? Remember the when he screws up, and this is what I was talking about, where you can fix foreshortening issues by using light tricks, or by using like white space, by using comicking tricks. You don't have to get everything 100% right. Even if it's supposedly what makes your work really good, right? Even if supposedly Araki is really good at form and foreshortening and all this stuff, he screws up, and how does he fix it? How does he still maintain the drama, which is actually what's important, because it's all storytelling. It's all about how the audience is reacting to your work. And yeah, same old, I'm just giving you some focal points to look at, right? So we're looking at the focal point. I don't understand that one. It's kind of a weird one. Oh, I see. Yeah, this is another little bit issue with the scans. So now we're back in the present, and we're getting back to some of that foreshortening, the vanishing point stuff that I was talking about. I use vanishing point and foreshortening interchangeably. Foreshortening is when you take a form like this piece of wood here, and normally this piece of wood would be like that long, right? This piece of wood right here, we're talking about this beam right here, it would be like that long, but because it's drawn receding into the background, it's only that long, right? It's only like, it's that long, that's the length, versus the actual length of the beam in spaces like that. So you foreshorten something when it goes towards a vanishing point, which literally just means like the front part of it, the fore part of it looks shorter, or it's shortened towards the fore. That's why there's a glowing spot here, because I was confused about this. I was like, what who cares about this bedstand? And the reason why you care about the bedstand is because it's a natural focal point, because the beams that's the vanishing point right there, right? The beams point towards that part. At least this one does, and it creates it's like an arrow almost. Actually, that's a good way to think of it. Lines that proceed towards a vanishing point act like arrows towards wherever they terminate. So it's like, look at this, it's like a freaking blinking arrow. And here, so again here, let's look at this. This figure is not correct. It's not foreshortened correctly. The shoulder is really weird for this angle, and he likes this pose because it's very dramatic, and it's really like, it's just dramatic looking pose. But that's fine, because he uses the light to create a sense of it's like a focal thing. The important part is that Dio is standing proudly. He doesn't give a crap. His dad is dying on a bed, and he couldn't give less of a crap. And he's like, has this really haughty pose, Haughty, this very arrogant pose, and he's standing very tall and proud, and he's and the light is around here again to just make sure that you see that that's the focal point. It doesn't really matter that they're in the wood room. It doesn't. What matters here is, in fact, you could let's see if I can. Oh God, I can't do that in this. Okay, never mind. But if you took out all the context, it doesn't matter. It's just like, you could make this all white, and it's just him standing before his dad's deathbed. And I would probably venture to guess that if you look at the colored scans, there is that emphasis between this form and this form, because that's what matters. It's the relationship between these two, and that's why this has a white outline around it, because that's the part you're supposed to look at. This again is like, he's totally like passed out here on his back, and yet here he's basically sitting up and reaching forward, but it doesn't matter, because it's just supposed to show that the drama of it. And he puts the hand in the foreground again to create a sense of foreground and background, to place the figure in space so that it's not just a reaction face, whereas this face is just a reaction face, and you're just supposed to care about that. This is something you do in comics. When you want to start a new scene, you make sure that it's on its own line. It's just like entering a new paragraph when you're typing an essay. You align all the previous panels here, so they all end on this line right here, right? And then this new panel starts, because this is a new establishing scene. This is a new scene. This is establishing a new scene. And in like Naoki Urasawa works, he did like 20th Century Boys and stuff like that. And this is, I would kind of argue it's like more proper technique, is you want this gap to be wider. You want the gap between new scenes to be wider, because the gap between panels, again, subconsciously generally implies the span of time between those two things, for the same reason that the width does, because it's how long it takes your eye to move from the previous space to the new space. And that's why a lot of times the longest spans of times are between page turns, or between like gutter, between two pages, like this. This is an establishing shot. That's why it's wide, big and wide. So you have an establishing shot, and then you show the focal points here. This is what's important. So you go wide shot, focal point. So this is a specific formula that is gleaned from cinema sometimes. So you do an establishing shot, which establishes, hey, this is where we are. Okay, so we're in a graveyard, and there's this guy here. That's the important information. Then you move to, here's this thing that's important about this scene. And then you go to, here's how the guy we just showed, This is his relationship to this scene. Okay, this is like a play, right? You establish, you say the setting, or a script. Scripts do this too. You say setting, and then you say and person who's on the scene, and then you go, what will be the focal point of the scene? What is the thing? It's a grave, Dario Brando's grave, and then you place the actors in position, and then they act, right? Which is exactly what's going on. So here's the background, here's the placement, and then here's the act. And how does he act? He spits on the grave because his dad was a drunk dick, and he is also a dick, and they had a terrible relationship. So, you gotta love each other. This is interesting. This is something that's also common in this is more common in manga than it is in Western comics. But this use of wide panels to do a monologue, and this is where a lot of bad anime pacing comes from, because in a comic it doesn't take that long to read this panel, but relative to the previous panels that you're spending some time in this character's head, because it takes a little while, and you get the sense that you're in Dio's internal monologue. In an anime, you have to actually literally show the time. It takes place in literal time. It takes a specific amount of seconds to watch an anime. So this takes a certain amount of time, this takes a certain amount of time, and this takes a certain amount of time. And unless the director has a really good sense for the ratio, the relationship of time between these panels, they will oftentimes mess it up so that this panel will be too long on screen, and this panel will be too long on screen, and then this panel will just be super long, and it just makes everything feel super slow. And part of that too is not just because the directors are bad, but because they're working to fill a certain time slot, right? They have to make a 20-minute long episode or something like that, or so it's not. They mess with the timing, and it's equivalent to taking these panels here and shrinking them, making them thinner, or making them wider, or making them bigger, or making them smaller. And if you did that, these pages would look kind of wacky. They would look a little off. This is just, small panels just to show quick action. So again, small panels create a quick rhythm. It's just snapping your fingers, just you just move along. There's equal spacing between the panels, just shows that it's this happens, this happens, this happens in equal measure. It's notes on a page. This. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Oh, actually, before I do that, you should pick up on... So this is something that Araki used to do. So this is something you'll know if you're familiar with the tools that manga artists use. But he's using a classic, I think a brush here, a brush pen to do these strokes. And what is interesting when you use a brush is you get a lot of flowing lines because of the way that you control the tip. And this is something that, while Araki's actual style will start to get harder and more specific over time, he always pays attention to these motions, right? Like I was saying in the very beginning with the tentacles coming out of the mask, where he's doing swoops. This is, again, look, swoops, and follow through, swoops, when he can't figure... I mean, it's not when he can't, but what he likes to do is he likes to establish a point, and then he likes to swoop out. He likes to do that swoop, and that's something that you see a lot in people who like to use brushes. And it develops later on, even when he starts using more a common, harder G pens and stuff like that. He still has swoops, and he still has motion. This is okay. Let's just see. Let's take a look here. We got wide. So this is really establishing a long sense of time. There's really ambiguous time passing, but that this is just really establishing a new, a new context, right? You're moving away from a very, very specific, tight scene of small actions into these very wide panels that occur in long, ambiguous space. This kind of paneling is really common in infographic comics and in historical comics, because they're trying to pack in information through text and also create this ambiguous, broad sense of time. They're going to be talking about an entire period. Again, this is 19th century, the era of technological development. So it's this really broad period of time. So they have this really wide panel here and another really wide panel with a lot of space in between, just to make it really clear that these images aren't specifically related, right? These people are not standing next to this train. This doll is not at all in the same space. They're all in completely different periods of time and contexts and stuff like that, essentially. Although they're linked here through the text. Even here, though, even in, Araki trying to be very literal, he can't help himself with the drama, right? So you have, boom, oh, that's a good way to do it, yeah. So look at I'll do the ratio of the vertical things will show you the foreshortening, but he can't even help himself here, right? Look at all this foreshortening, right? And he does this intent. That's why I bet that's why he drew a train, because he wanted to draw dramatic foreshortening. He just always wants to be dramatic, and so he drew something that could be drawn foreshortened like this, which the train can be because it's made out of these boxes. So you naturally can foreshorten it. It's very easy to just boxes get bigger, smaller. This is fun. Again, this is because I guarantee you he drew this, and he drew these characters, and I bet a lot of these characters are like this because his one shot before this, I think right directly before this was a Western. So he's drawing outfits and things that I would venture to guess are actually probably more appropriate to the American West, more so than they're appropriate to 20th century, 19th century England. Yeah, and he's just drawing figures here. This is a comics thing. Oh, here's something common. In comics and in cartooning, the farther back a figure is, the less you have to draw specific details for people to understand what it is, right? I mean, that's something everyone probably knows, but right. So this guy, you can't see his pupils. Also, the scans are like bad quality, but so you can't see this guy's pupils. This guy doesn't even have a mouth. It doesn't matter. He doesn't look like a mannequin person. He just looks like a regular person. You just can't see his details. Or as opposed to this person, like you can see his nostrils, right? Because he's right here in the foreground. This guy, oh my god, look, nostrils. You can see the freaking follicles on his beard. But this is a good way to show, too, that, like, don't be intimidated if you think, like, these scenes are really detailed, because they are, but they aren't, right? Like, you only have to worry about the details in the foreground. You don't have to worry as much about the back. And this, like this detail isn't even drawn right? Like, the narrow should end, like, the nose ends here, not here. But it's okay. It doesn't matter, because, like, you get the point of the scene, and it's not like, super crucial. And I keep saying this because, again, like, if you're only an anime watcher, or you only see the memes of Jojo from, like, when he really nails it, you might get the idea that, like, Araki's always, like, 140% on with all of these amazing poses, or, all these things, but he's not, and it's okay, because what's important about the poses and everything is the sense of drama they create. It's not about getting everything literally right. It's not like a life study drawing. It's about, how do you feel? How does it make you feel? This one's cool. I'm actually really impressed. I'm always impressed when people can make things look fake, right? Like, he can make a doll look like a doll. It looks just a little off. Like, everything's a little stiff about this. And I think he can do that because he understands, again, unlike other Japanese artists a lot of times, he understands, especially contemporary manga artists, he understands the human form is not blocked. Like, if you ever look online, like, I can show you real quick, like, human figure blocks, right? I'll probably find something with okay, so, like, this one's really common to see, like, people learning from this. They learn from, like, these kinds of figures, especially in, like, low level art. Okay, thank you. And especially in, like, low level, like, art classes, like beginning art classes and stuff like that. And what this does is, while it teaches you how to It teaches you to look at the human form in terms of the underlying shapes, but there is, because of the way tendons work and things like that, and muscle groups, there's actually, like, curves to the human body that are important to give it a sense of organic, like an organic sense. Like, organic forms in general have like weird curves to them. Like, so here's a common one. If you look at the wrist tendon here, this is very common. This wrist tendon is organic. That's not something that you commonly see in mannequins or anything like that. And everything here is very static. You don't get a sense of curves, like the legs stick straight out, but actual human legs, like if you look at one of the earlier, well, actually, let's see if you can see it here. Yeah, so you can see this, the leg curves inward. It curves, like, in and out here. because it's an organic leg. That's the way legs actually do, like the shin bone and everything around it, the muscle groups. It makes it curve, and here it just there is no underlying curve. It sticks straight out because it's a doll, and that's part of what makes it look like a doll. So it's very impressive, and you can just see the difference, right, between the doll hands and the human hands. And the human hands have all these ridges and forms, and the doll hands are kind of like single. There's single units, because in real life that's how porcelain dolls are made. As far as I know, I'm not a porcelain doll expert or anything. And again, so you notice Araki's all about that flow. He's all about that's not really talked about again, especially because in the anime artists, anime is done by production, so things like flow from a single figure are not often captured well, especially when it comes from ink lines. So what I'm talking about here is, you look at the focal black part right here. So you have this you have this black part right here, right? There's a lot of just ink. There's just like a lot of black right here, right? And there's a lot of black right here. And from this black, like I was saying earlier with like the brush strokes, Araki draws out the inks, and he makes these lines. He makes these flowing lines, these lines that go from thick to thin. And what he's doing is he's sticking a brush down on the page and he's swooping it out. So he sticks it here and then he swoops it out, and he sticks it here and he swoops it out, and he swoop, 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 swoop. And he gets all these like many, many lines, and he creates these curves and swoops and things like that. And when people, and he can do that because he's doing it in one sitting, and he's connecting lines, and like these lines connect to these lines, and these lines connect over here, and they swoop and they terminate over here, and he just does it all in one go. But when you're drawing anime, generally, right, when you're doing anime, like when they do the Jojo anime, a large part, one person does the character outlines, another person does the interior outlines, another person does, so you don't get connecting lines the same way, and you get way fewer of these organic shapes, and if you do get those, it's because it's like the quality shot where they like someone sat down and just drew over like 5 of the same frames with the same technique, and it takes forever, but it's dope. But it's easier, so it's easier to get more artsy in manga because of that. This is interesting. So this is an interesting thing. I don't think this works personally, but he does it, which is you have the close-up and the wide, and then you go to the acontextual far. And when I say it's acontextual, is because you remember that face from earlier, that little like, yeah, right here, boom, this little like this Darlo Brando face that he does, where this is actually more appropriate, where it's like smaller, it's not on the same line as this panel, it's like surrounded by a lot of white space, and because of that it feels like it's its own thing. This is the same thing here. And while this is good to introduce a scene, I think this is good to introduce a scene, he already introduced the scene here, because the hand is already grabbing the doll, and so this just feels like there's a weird, super long period of time between this hand and this panel here, and I don't think it's the kind of thing he'll do often later, because it creates, I think, in my opinion, too much of a break. It's like putting a paragraph, a new paragraph line right after the beginning sentence of introducing a new scene. But in any case, let's talk instead about this is a really cool example of how to use line weights. This is something I like to do a lot. This is something you see in Western comics more than you see in Eastern comics, actually. Is just like this sort of very comic-y, like GTA San Andreas likes to do this too. Can I pull up can we get a GTA box art thread going? No, GTA box art. Do we have the San Andreas? Oh my god, I should really be using DuckDuckGo for this kind of stuff, right? Because they just let you link to the image directly. Well, you can see it here on Steven. Yeah, okay, so this guy, Stephen Bliss, I don't know if he's actually the guy who works on it, but look, you see these really thick outlines? That's really common in a very unabashed cartoon style, and you can use it to convey visual information in comics if you're not afraid to do so. And what I mean is, so here, this stone wall is in the foreground, and in real life, nothing has thick outlines like this unless you paint them to do so. That's why you get really weird, like, oh, this cafe looks like a comic, or this backpack looks like it's a cartoon, because they drew outlines on it, and real life does not have outlines. Outlines are basically a literalization of how people perceive things. Like, you perceive this stone wall as its own thing, so you can draw an outline on it to convey that idea. But what you can also do is what's called using line weights, and line weights is just like thickness of lines, but it's specifically you weight the line, you give it more weight, you make it thicker depending on whether it's in the foreground or background. And things that are in the foreground have thicker outlines than things in the background because for various reasons, various like real life reasons, like for example, atmospheric distortion. So like things really far away, like you can see this whole panel illustrates this. The line for the hill, right, fades into the distance. It fades and blends into this white. And in real life, that's actually kind of true because things tend to fade because there's like particles in the air and things like that. So when you look off into the distance, everything starts to sort of blend together, and it becomes just all this blending. But in the foreground, things are very distinct because you can see them, especially when they're in relation to things in the background. So this is a very comicsy thing to do that I like actually doing as well, which is you have this thing in the foreground, you kind of want to make it more literal, or you want to make it really clear of the position in space, so you just slap an outline on it, you just slap a line weight on it, and it looks kind of cartoony, it looks kind of like Borderlandsy, but you know, I like it. And if you don't overuse it, you wouldn't even notice it. Like if you're just like reading this really quickly, like you're just like, oh my god, you know, comment da 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 da, and you're reading and you go, oh whoa, so that it just looks like a stone wall in passing. You're not even paying attention to the fact that like nothing else in this whole image has anything close to a uniform outline like that, but it just reads really quickly. Spare points. This shows that Araki knows what he's doing. Like he's either classically trained or he cared enough to learn properly, because this kind of shading is important. Newbies will not be able to shade core shadows and out shadows. Core shadows are just like literally there's no light coming in, so it's black, and that's usually core. It's the interior, and on the outside where there's more light bouncing in. So real quick. Well, I mean, okay, light essentially is not just like one point hitting something. It's usually like you have a big old disc, like the sun is a big disc, and it doesn't just shoot light straight down, right? It shoots rays from all the different parts of the disc emit light. And what happens is you know, so if you look at the tree and you have the sun over here, right? There's the sun and it's shooting rays of light. Where no rays reach, you'll get the core shadow, because like that's where all rays of light are being blocked. That's the core shadow. But then where you have like this ray of light will reach, but like these rays don't, that's where you get something like this this outside shadow here. And just being aware of that that's like shading. That's like understanding how shading works essentially. And what I'm trying to say is that Araki understands shading, right? He understands like classical art stuff, and this is something that you know, it's something to look out for, because it's knowing this stuff is what lets him evolve and grow later on when he does his art. It lets him make conscious choices about what to show and what to do. This is very Araki, this panel. It doesn't look like it, but he loves to do full gesture stuff. So what that means is he loves to do full poses, right? I mean, even in this, like, you're just like, imagine this were close up, like really close up here, and then the hand were just like curling inward, and it's like, that's just like a classic Jojo pose. You know, like the freaking the foot pointing down like this. And the reason why he does these poses, the reason why he does this is drama, again, because what happens is it's just like when you're watching sports, you actually instinctively, your brain starts to mimic or feel like it feels what you would be feeling if you were doing that thing. Like when you watch someone run really fast and really hard, you actually kind of your brain starts to like release the endorphins of like running and stuff like that as well. And the same thing is true for illustrated or for illustrations and things like that too. So when he does this and the foot is kind of curved here, right, which is like the same, the toes have to be pointed in order for this to happen. You actually get a sense of tension. There's tension here. There's tension because it comes out and then it swoops in here. This isn't just like if he wanted to, right, he could have just drawn this doing like the hand like that, right, which would have been actually more natural. But he doesn't. He does instead. He pulls it out to here and he swoops it and he curves it back. It was like three. Look how freaking boom, 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 zigzaggy that is. And he does that because it's to give you a sense of tension. The guy is like tensing his muscles for whatever reason. And you as the reader, it's just a little more drama. It's just putting a little more drama in there. Just a wee bit more drama. Again, look at those swoops. Look at this. This is something you really see if you look at the outlines on Araki stuff, and it's not something you get in the anime. Again, is look at those strokes. He's like, whew, those like feathering strokes. They start here and they swoop out to here, and then he does a little couple of. He's doing like really just nice, these elegant like brush strokes here, just for funsies, just for, just because he wants to. This is also something you can do. So this is something interesting. This comes from his earlier. This comes from his earlier panels in his earlier pages, and probably his experience as an author is what he's putting here. So you have the face here, and you have these faces here, and this face is just a normal pose, which is foreshortened a little bit, right? The hands are a little bit wider up front because they're in the foreground, and my opacity is not cooperating. Oh, because I set it to orange juice. Okay, so right, so there's that, and you start to see how that's foreshortened a little bit. This too, it's just to create a sense of perspective. That's actually, the face is a little too big for this. But again, it doesn't matter because the point is, what is her face doing? And she's freaking out. She's very sad. So it's, but again, because the actual eye line should be right there, but whatever. It doesn't matter. But this is really interesting because this figure is generally correct. It's placed in a specific point in space. These figures are not. They're very acontextual. They're not even looking at her, right? Like, if you look at it, this is an old school manga thing that's still kind of done to this day, but he does it kind of half in, half out. Because usually when you have pages like this, you will not have this doll here, and you just have these faces commenting, and they'll be commenting on a scene. But these guys are actually interacting. They're supposed to be talking directly to her, but they're not even looking at it. This guy is like looking all the way over here, whatever. But instead, what he's doing is he puts the faces, he draws them however he wants, he draws them in profile because he wants to, and then he uses the doll to create a midground here, because the doll is, like her face, somewhat, like her whole figure, is actually somewhat foreshortened, right? Like, it's here, and it points a little bit there. So it kind of points in that direction. And what that does is, again, this is like, everyone's like, oh, Rocky does everything perfectly. But instead, he creates a midground here to bridge between these two images. So you could draw this one, you could draw this on a napkin, and you could draw this one on like a different day, and you can slap them together, and he bridges them with this thing right here. And this is important because later on, he uses stuff like this to draw whatever the hell he wants, like these really dramatic, crazy-ass poses all over the place that really make you feel drama, and still somehow tie it into the scene using techniques like this, using little, like, figure techniques like this. So again, not everything has to be placed correctly, not everything has to be perfect. Here we go again, right? This guy looks like a weird, screwed-up version of Josuke right here. But yeah, background, midground, foreground. Background, midground, foreground. They're not even like kind of incorrectly spaced, but he's just their general relationship to each other is being expressed simply by where they're placed, overlapping each other. This is a very comic-y thing to do, and it's done very effectively. And it also means you don't have to worry about things like, well, like use a 3D modeling and like place the figures in specific space and then figure out the exact angle. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that these guys are talking to each other, and he's talking about the doll. In terms of panel spaces, so this is longer and acontextual, by the way. Like, this is horizontal, and this is like done like this because it's a summary of the whole scene. And this is something I actually personally have trouble with too sometimes when I'm drawing, which is when you've established a scene, so you establish they have the doll, you establish they're not giving it back, and they're messing with her. You don't have to draw every little instance where she jumps for the doll and then they pull it back and then she falls down and she skins her knee, and there's all these like things that go on in a scene of bullying to make the scene feel like they're really messing with her. Instead, in comics, you can do something like this, which is you just create a very wide panel that illustrates the relationships at play going on, which is like she is crying and she wants her doll back and they refuse to give it to her. And when you do it broad like this, it takes up a span of time and it becomes this broader context that describes the scene. It's a cool way to not have to draw like 3 pages of like these dudes like messing with her, and you still get a sense that they're doing it for a long period of time, that is taking place over this long period of time. Yeah, this stuff is all just, again, foreground, background stuff, standing on it. This is all just like random. This is just comicsy stuff. You can just, anyone would think to doodle that kind of stuff usually. We're going into page 11, the first introduction of our protagonist, the first of the JoJos. This is a hilarious page. This is a hilarious panel. These are actually really cool. This is cool because so there's, if you notice, there's a really big gap between these faces here, right? Between the top faces and Erina's face, there's a really broad gap, and what that does is it makes the reader take the amount of time it takes the implied characters to witness what's going on. Because right here, this is Jonathan. This is like his first appearance. This is his introduction, and it's a big surprise. Like, they're messing with her, all this stuff is going on, no, and then suddenly this guy appears. And in later stuff, he chooses to be a little more dramatic. Like in later JoJo stuff, he'll just make this face panel the whole freaking page and just introduce them that way. But this is a really cool, like, poignant thing he does here, which is just, you know, he's like, here's this face, and they're like, what is that? And she's like, what is that? Oh, it's this guy, you know. But that amount of time where you have the time to ask what is that, and you have this little pensive moment, is created by this empty space here. So when you want to have people take a little extra time, you can make the panel wider, you can add a little extra space, you know, and it creates time, essentially. But if you do it too much, then it breaks the illusion and it breaks the flow of reading, and people just think like, why is there all this white space here? And of course, this is really cool. Again, this is something that's really crucial if you're good at doing drama, like Araki is, which is, there's really pensive space here. There's barely any cartooning. There's just a little bit of little things popping out of here. Like, everything is literal, right? This is like a literal, nothing here is like cartoony. There's no like sound effects. There's no like extra stuff except for this little bit of her showing her popping up. In fact, you could even get rid of this and it would work fine. And then it goes smash like right into like freaking like, oh my god, like toning and gradients and bada bada ba, and like look at how like dramatically inked this is, and this word bubble popping out here, and you know, suddenly we're snapped back into cartoon space. We're going from like just no cartooning, like no word bubbles, and it just boom, and it's just super dramatic. And then he rides that intensity, he rides that energy right back into here. And this is really important because, again, JoJo's about the rise and fall. It's about the climax and the excitement. It's about the energy being carried through. And there's very little energy here, and then he just incites you with this, and then he rides it by making their faces super cartoony and like goofy and stuff here. So you get this energy. It's like Devil May Cry. It's like all the super fun stuff. It's all about just boom, energy, and you just ride that energy. And he's not afraid to get cartoony with it. This is Fist in the North Star. This is just Fist in the North Star right here. And what makes this Fist in the North Star is there is no specificity here. This actually comes from German Expressionism. I know that sounds really like artsy, but it's what it is the fact that this guy is way bigger, that he seems bigger than Jonathan, is more important than literally their relative size. And this is something that doesn't come across again as well in anime, which they have like reference sheets and stuff, so everyone is supposed to stay within like a certain size. And also like later on in the comic, Araki gets more literal too. But here, like this kid is probably like, I mean, he's maybe like a half a foot taller than Jonathan or something like that, and he's definitely not like built like this relative to Jonathan's small frame. But it's supposed to just exemplify how freaking big this dude seems, right? And how scary this dude seems relative to, you know, Jonathan, and therefore how courageous he is for jumping in on there. And yeah, it's just supposed to have the drama. And again, we're back to the drama of like the early chapters where you have like big, bulky dude and smaller looking protagonist. And, you know, you have more of this foreshortening here. Boom, boom. It's coming out like that. And it's just, you know, face. This is standard stuff. for a Rocky, at least. This is goofy. This is a little, like, goofy thing. He does this here. One way to draw motion is to draw overlapping forms like this. And if you set up your gesture correctly, so what works here is... Araki has a good sense of gesture, and gesture is just the way that it's the tension inherent to forms, like I was talking about earlier. So this zigzagginess here creates it's almost like a like he's cocking his arm back, right? He's cocking his arm back here. I mean, he's tackling him, but he's also cocking his arm back, and it doesn't seem like that at first, but it's very apparent if you come out here because he starts swinging, and this works better, right, because of this panel here, because this arm has a little bit of tension. It's cocked back here, and he just starts swinging in here. So there's already like an anticipation. There's anticipation here of there's all this space here. All this space is the space that could be occupied by his fist, essentially, because it's cocked back here, and you know that you get you know, having a human body, you have a general feel for like a range of motion, and you can feel that the range of motion is somewhere here, and that's where his arm takes. That's like the range of motion that his arm follows through with in this panel. So it's just implied and follow through, right? Implied and follow through. That's what Araki does. He creates this preparation and then the follow through here. And this is cool. So this panel here is interesting because what's going on is literally Jonathan jumps in, tries to be the hero, and he sucks, right? He's just weak. He's lame. That's the whole point. He sucks. People, especially at the period when this was written, people would not like him, you know, like the audience would not like this character that much. So, you know, this is him getting his sort of like just desserts. This is him sort of getting what he deserves by like not being prepared. That's the way the audience is supposed to perceive it. He's getting his comeuppance. And what's really interesting here is this motion, if you notice, these lines extend beyond the panel. These lines don't, right? They start here and then they swoop in here. So all the motion is, you know, maybe there's like a little bit here, starting here, but the motion is generally contained within the panel. This happens in the space, in the narrative. But here there's actually, this is very violent, because what this is it breaks the fourth wall a bit. It breaks the reader's sense of comfort. And this is something that comics can do really well, and good comic authors can do really, really well, to create like a really dramatic, sudden movement or something like that, is they can start a panel off. They can start the motion that's implied in the panel out of the actual frame of the panel, and then bring it in. And if they do it right, like right here, it really feels impactful. Like it really feels like this is like boom, and it really feels like he comes in from, you know, RKO out of nowhere. But really, like this dude out of nowhere just comes in and just smacks right here. Here's the plane of here's the impact right here. Oh, and this is something common too, which is if you want to do like really gestural stuff like EPO and like action oriented stuff, a common way to make something feel like it's more impactful is to actually show the moment before or after the hit, right? For the same reason, anticipation and follow through. You also have the human imagination is often more potent than your art skills. And so what that means here is that this is not the moment of impact. The moment of impact has already happened. He's already gotten hit. That's why he's moving downwards, right? Because he's already been hit. And the impact happened here. His head would have had to been here in order for this to be the moment of impact. Instead, what's happening is this is the moment after the impact, and you get a sense of how hard he must have been hit because of how quickly he seems to be moving downward. And the way that you understand how quickly he's supposed to be moving downward is actually by the length of these little lines here exceeding his actual form, because his shirt stops here, but the lines stop here. If the lines extended all the way to here, right, it would seem like he's moving even faster. And in fact, one way you can tell if someone understands gesture is smaller objects move faster. So like, or like, you know, like a fist at the end of an arm should be blended more with motion lines than the smaller part, because the fist is actually moving faster and it creates a sense of motion. So again, we can look at the lines between these two characters just to see that, look how fast this guy's arm looks to be moving, and he actually looks to be moving a little slower than that. And that's just because of the length of lines that are coming off of their forms and breaking that. Again, this is a nice little like three quarters, 1/4 composition here. It's pretty classic. This form here is used to break motion. This is used to like, so you get like, this is happening and there's sudden action, and then this breaks because you're reading right to left because it's a manga, and you're like, oh my god, action, and then it actually kind of boop, it slows down for a moment because you zoom out and you have like this little sort of like zoom out scene, and it breaks the tension. And again, this isn't important if you're doing what Araki does, which is you do a flow of action. If you're doing like Baki, like for example, Baki the Grappler couldn't give a crap about stuff like this, because Baki just goes like, it goes like 8 to 10 and then 10 to 12 and then 12 to 15. It just keeps rising in intensity. So it doesn't need breaks the same way this does. But if you have this really intense action panel and then you break it here, it means that you can do like mini climaxes and you can build up even more and more over time. And it's part of why I think part 3 is really, really well done, because part 3 is all about building up ascending peaks until you get to this really amazing climax. But this ain't part 3. So let's keep on. Yeah. He does these little like acontextual breakpoints, and this is very Calvin and Hobbes actually. This face, I mean, Calvin and Hobbes came after Jojo, but this just reminds me that's a very Calvin face to make. It's acontextual. This is just him, I think, having fun and dicking around. He drew this face here and he had fun with it, so he just kept going with open mouth faces. I don't think there's any particular reason for that. Alright, and then again, Araki, you know, this is actually not, I'm surprised he didn't do this better, but that should have been the line. But that's generally the idea behind it, right? Finger pointing to object. Hey, but check out what we have here. We have those white outlines in the foreground to show you. And actually what's really interesting is white outlines can be used the same way black outlines can, the same way I was talking about line weights. So line weights, right? See how the farther part of the finger is less thick with lines, and then the closer part of the hand is thicker, and that's just line weights to give you a sense of, again, like what's closer to you and not. And white lines can actually be used the same way. He doesn't do it here, but he does it to create a focal point, right? He's using the white just like around Dio's form earlier. So he's like, I want you to look at the finger because the finger points to the house. But you can actually use white outlines the same way you use black outlines and create thicker white outlines around closer parts and thinner around farther parts. Fun facts. Again, hey, look at that. It's a thick uniform line to create boundaries. This one doesn't have any thick outlines. See, right here, there's like not really any specific outlines. Kind of is there, but not really. But here, boom, fat outline. And it just, again, creates a clear delineation in space. So that it's so you have a foreground and background. Because if you didn't have this outline here, it could be easy to mistake this for like a painting, actually, like a pastoral. Like this finger would be looking like it's pointing at a painting, because it wouldn't be clear that there's midground and background, etc., etc. This is just because I think this is just because this is an interesting like little connect four sequence, and I think so. What's interesting is that this is not perfectly aligned, right? These are not perfectly aligned, and that's actually intentional because let me show you. If you were to grab and move this panel here, and if this were my original form of this page and it had the white background, so I didn't have to fill this back in. Okay, so if you had this, this sequence would read a little differently if these were all equidistant panels. like, yeah. Oh, now I can just do it because I did the white background. Yeah. So like, let's just, whoop, and then this is actually a common mistake that young, like actual academic comickers do. I don't know if it's a mistake. It's sometimes intentional, but they do stuff like this. Like they create like little sequences that are like you see how like this now immediately just becomes harder to read. Like you're trapped in this like Connect Four sequence of of like Jonathan eternally blowing his nose or wiping his bloody nose, and that's because like this is an ambiguous structure. Like they're kind of, it's like a circle. It's like the same concept where like there's nowhere to leave. There's no particular way to exit this visually. You go right, left, and then you go wait, down, and then you wait, am I supposed to go down here? And then this, and you just kind of get caught in this loop. Whereas in the original form of it, before I switch things around, you'll see, right, that there's a very clear gap here. There's a gap here between these panels, and these two are together so that it's very clear that you go this sequence. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, boom, and then you're done, and you exit cleanly. Because if you don't do that, like I just showed you, it looks nice and symmetrical, and that's something like an art student might do, but it is not great to read. It totally screws up the pacing of the story. I mean, you can do it in stories where like you want to create a sense of ambiguous time, but in Jojo where like he wants to keep the story moving, it would be not a good move. Although, yeah, etc., etc. And this is interesting because he really doesn't dramatize this, right? Because he's trying to show that Jonathan's kind of a little bee, you know. He's a dainty little bee, you know, and he's doing like the dainty little, I'm gonna wipe my nose, you know, because I can't get blood on it. I'm a little gentleman, you know. He's supposed to be very dainty. So you have these small little panels that show his careful little action by action, and then his, oh, it's a hand embroidered handkerchief. Oh, how dainty. You know, he's what was called a bocce. I think bocce was the old term, and it's means like a rich boy in Japanese, and it's sort of like effete, just you just can't stand him, you know, essentially. And it's an archetype in a lot of media, but it was what Jonathan was supposed to be. That was like his vibe when he was a kid, because he's supposed to grow into being this really gallant hero, but initially he's like this little rich, you know. He really is the son of a Joestar. Again, Araki just snaps right back into ultra violence and actual violence too. This isn't just comedic, right? Like, and this is what I was talking about earlier. So the the part of the leg that's the most blurred out, right, is this foot. And this foot is done like that because it's the fastest moving part. Fast. So it's the most blurred. And that sort of attention to realistic detail, like that realistic rendering kind of thing, is what creates more and more of a sense of drama. So the more seemingly realistic something feels, the more serious people think it's supposed to be. That's the way that they read it. And so this does feel like actual violence. It doesn't just feel like cartoon violence because of that. I mean, at least that's the way I look at it. Little stray observation here. This is the reason why everyone loves drawing bandages on anime heroes, and why because, you know, he does it too. These are called cross contour lines here, and they're his socks in this image. But what it is again, I'm gonna have to do it this way because I don't have my pen working. What cross contour lines are is they're just lines that show the three-dimensionality of an object. Because when you're drawing in 2D, right, like if you just draw the outline of something, it could be really wide or really thin, and you can't really tell from first glance. But if you draw cross contour lines, you can actually fill out you can make it look like a 3D object. And it's shorthand for artists when they're doing it, because you line it up, and you it lets you like orient yourself when you're like, oh, like where does this knee end? It ends here, and like the foot ends here, and why does it end there? Because you have these cross contour lines which function like foreshortening lines as well. But if you ever wonder why anime characters are always wearing bandages on their long limbs, like their necks and their forearms and their shins, it's because they're just literalizing cross contour lines. They're having an excuse to. They might not even know it either. You know, it just might be habit from doing art practice and drawing figures, but they like to draw cross contour lines. He gets smacked. This is her little doll here, right? This is actually really figurative. This is not literal, but it's supposed to remember the whole thing was about the doll, and the doll's still there. So that's why that doll is still there. It's the association between Erina and her doll. This panel thing is supposed to be, again, because you are supposed to read this part. Like, you're not just supposed to skip over it. Comicking is not about absolute panels, right, size, as much as it's about relative sizes. And because this is smaller, and because this is smaller, and because this is wider, this becomes the meaningful panel right here. And this meaningful panel is very sad because he just got the crap kicked out of him and he sucks. And it's like, oh, he was like so romantic, and then he was lame, super lame. Bruce Wayne got the beat down. And so that's why it's bigger. And this one's smaller too because this is a shonen comic. And so it's supposed to be your sympathetic for him, but you can't have too much sadness or emotion because, Jonathan would resent it and the readership would resent it as well. I mean, at this period of time, you can do whatever you want, but that's why he doesn't like have a full panel of her looking sad and stuff like that, because it's not about her. It's about the fact that he is pitiable. And so you just show this little bit here to show that there's pity being thrown in his direction, but you don't show Erina because it's not really about Erina, and you don't show too much of it because you don't want to wallow in like, oh man, this is a huge sad thing, this is like, oh, super emotional. He'd be like, no, nah. And that's exactly the next panel. He goes all Domonkashu and no, don't touch me, smack, bah. That's what that says, bah, and he's smacking him away. Yeah, this is just outlines for emphasis, right? Black backgrounds, outlines with white. Same thing. And all right, 13. So what we have here is this is actually the front panel, I believe. This is the cover art, and I didn't put the cover out here because I'm just trying to analyze the panel, the pages and the whole comic as it was originally composed, as opposed to like, how it ends up in the colored version in the final print and all that stuff. But like, because then you get a clearer sense of the decisions being made. But so in any case, that's why you haven't seen this image before, even though it is, I believe, the cover image for this chapter on the volume. It's just him being very dramatic, very gallant. This is why gesture is important, and this is why like I can't stand it when people draw all their anime characters the way they draw their coworkers, which is like everyone has like tilted here. Let me do this real quick. They have their head is like this, and then they always have the frickin' I use the computer too much neck curve like that, like that's their neck, and then yeah, and then like, and their shoulders are like this, like that's how like they draw the characters in profile, even when they're supposed to be standing straight up, like, and even when they're like their character is supposed to be really like noble and straight edged, and like they're supposed to be standing up straight, they stand like this. They look like freaking like birds because the people who are drawing those people, in my opinion, is because they don't always understand like the way that like body language conveys certain things, like really like all kinds of body language, or it's just not in vogue anymore to study that kind of stuff. It's just not the vogue thing to draw anymore for whatever reason. Because look right here, I mean, like this is how you know that despite Jonathan being a little B, he is proud, and his pride will become a source of his heroicness because he is standing straight. Like that neck is popped up, that shoulder is like pop side, he is like standing up straight, and that's his pride. Which will become the common defining feature of at least the first 3 JoJo's, if not the first 4. Well, okay, 1 and 3, really, right? But it's that pride that defines their character. It's just like, boom, everything's straight. And that's just important. That's just the kind of thing that you can pull off if you get comfortable drawing the human figure in a variety of poses. You can choose to show them in a variety of poses that conveys their personality, their emotions, and things like that. And it's just a very simple way to. You could not even have these words, and it would totally. You would understand the point of what he's feeling and what he's doing. And this is actually really funny because I don't know if this is intentional. I think Araki's got a sense of humor, so it probably is. This is absolutely drawn just like like those dramatic gekiga, like the noir cop, the hard boiled detective cops, you know, like what's I like Japan went through like a noir revival in like the 70s, and they had all these like hard-boiled detective types and like the samurai and everyone like walking off into the distance wearing a black trench coat. You know, this like literally this exact scene, they're walking away from a woman into the sunset. So you know, you even have the lighting around him and she's looking on, and even here he's like walking off into the sunset, and it's very like, you know, it's very much like those old school. And I think he did that because he has a sense of humor, just a little bit, or just because subconsciously he grew up reading those comics. Here, nice little detail is the shaking, right? I don't know, like when I read comics pretty quickly, and I don't catch on all this stuff even on the first time I read through, but it's interesting to see what he's trying to convey. And he is trying to convey that Jonathan is being very proud, but he is very beaten and shaken from this, and so he's whatever. And he left his handkerchief behind, and it just shows that he's trying really hard, but he is a little B for now. Right. And this is the first appearance of I think this is the first appearance of one of these long panels here. These long panels are interesting. They're more common in, I would say, well, they make more sense in manga than they do in Western comics, because Japanese is read top to bottom. So this kind of functions in a similar way in manga to wide panels in Western style comics. It creates a longer read. There's a longer read in these panels if you are Japanese, because Japanese is read top to bottom. So remember that if you're looking at the original manga, the text you'll be reading it top to bottom. Every one of these word panels is read top to bottom, so the actual flow of reading is a combination of right to left and top to bottom. Whereas in American comics, the top to bottom motion is solely created by the panels, and the text creates a horizontal motion, whereas that's reversed in manga. So what I'm saying is that I see these panels sometimes in Western comics, and I don't think they make very much sense, because English readers read left to right way faster than Japanese people do. I don't think they read top to bottom as thoroughly. But a Japanese reader, this will function like horizontal panels. This will function to be a nice slice of time. And this is actually this is something that not that I agree with everything Scott McCloud says, but Scott McCloud, he broke down comic panels into several categories, and he noted that manga is very unique for having what's called moments. They capture moments in their comics, so their choice of image and their choice of like what they choose to portray is sometimes they choose to emphasize a moment in time because it's very poignant and it expresses what they want to talk about. And I think this is a good example of that. You know, there's no sky, it's just a focus on Jonathan's figure crossing over the ridge, and there's his bloodied and forgotten handkerchief in the foreground, and it's just this very like poignant description and summary of the scene. And the whole dynamic going on. And again, like I don't even remember this scene from like when I first read through Jojo, so like who knows if I even like read it this way. But it is there, and it is, I think, there for a reason, and I imagine it works better in Japanese than it works in English. Black is used to create lack of context the same way white is. Anything actually can be used. As long as you have a fill, it's called a fill, and fills can be any color, and they just create a lack of context, and it's just supposed to be like, oh, Jonathan Joestar. And I don't know how intentional this is, probably a little bit, but you'll notice that the swirl on the signature, kind of points out to the character just a little bit. And if This is what I like about non-traditional comicking is, when you study it and you start breaking rules and stuff like that, you can play around with that. Like the guy who does Dresden Kodak does that. He'll play with the image in the panel, and he'll take it out to cross panels and stuff like that, and it creates a really nice, beautiful, flowing sense of imagery. Here though, Araki's, he's not gonna break those rules just yet. Yeah. You see there's less line weight. There's less line weights here, although there is thickness around it. This is a brush pen kind of thing. This kind of scene is not, again, done in the anime because of the delicateness of how you have to do Well, I guess there's like a number of reasons. I shouldn't say that, but this is just it's a pain. It's a pain to do these kind of shots in the anime, and the anime does have something similar to its credit. But anime, especially modern anime, will prefer to instead use post-processing lighting effects to do something similar, as in they will create a spotlight and then they will feather it. They'll diffuse the sides to create a sense of this like golden hour glow, which is caused by sunset, as opposed to Araki just draws it into the scene itself. So the anime version, again, they'll draw the basic parts of the scene, but then they'll add on top of it like lighting effects. And instead, Araki literally, the scene is composed of black inks and like light grays that imitate the lighting effects. This is akin to like if you look at like impressionist art, or you just look at like painting and stuff like that. They paint in the literal effects. They don't paint over it with, well, sometimes they do actually as well, but like they will paint in the underlying effects instead of like doing an underlying scene and then, you know, painting effects on top of it. Not, again, not one better than the other, but it creates a different aesthetic. It's a different aesthetic. This is really cool. I really, really, really like this shot, but that's just like a personal thing. This is like, I love it because there's all this motion, right? It's just like this sense of motion flows from down to here and then swoops in down here, cuts in down here, swoops down here, and swoops in and then comes down. And the neck swoops up from down here, and then it feathers and flares out that. And there's so much motion in his hand when he's doing this. And this is something that's very hard to capture in animation because you have to stack cells on top of each other. It's something that OVAs do sometimes, but you know, you can do this sort of thick and thin and flowing line in a static image that is just really hard to pull off in an animation without it looking like the outlines are moving, which generally is a no-no for the way they want to do stuff. Yeah, in fact, you can even see he swooped in here. So I think he did this all in one go when he was inking. So he did one swoop in here, and then he did one down, one in here, 1, 2. So swoop, 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 and then he did this in one. Yeah, so he did the chin in one go. With an ebbing and flowing, like probably like a G pen, and then he swooped in down here, decided he didn't like how thin that neck looked, and so he made it into shadow, and then he drew the actual neckline down here. And it's just another example of how like you can do the art stuff, like you can get into it and you can do the swoops and you do all that stuff, and then you can fix it up after, as long as you know kind of what you want and what you're doing. You can change what was the neckline into the shadow and then just add the neckline afterwards for thickness if you want. Yeah, and so this is kind of more what I was talking about here with like so this is like these faces here, right? Where I'm like, these faces would be acontextual without the doll. Same thing here. Her face is acontextual, right? This is not, she's not, this is like her thinking, right? This is a very like 90s anime thing, right? Where it's like you have the girl looking off into an unknown distance and the faded out memory of someone walking away in the background. Yeah, so, and white outline to emphasize that. Just so it's so pretty. I like these inks. I like it when they do blacks like that. Yeah, this is more standard. Now he's just having fun with it. This is cool too. Okay, this is cool too because there's 3/4 composition. Like he's using the thickness of the line to create, like, there's more thickness up here and then it's receding thickness to thinness down that. There's like a lot of visual rhythm here. This is just like, he's just drawing a face and he's having fun with it because, like, again, these lines are right thick. It's like the thickest, darkest part is here, and then there's like this is thick, and then this is thinner, and then it keeps getting thinner, and like this is kind of out of place, but there's a visual rhythm from top to bottom. This one is just like, oh, there's like a bunch of black here, there's like some random black here, there's black here, black here, black here. It's just like all over. There's no real like rhythm to me for this one. It's just it's decently drawn, right? It's like nice outline figure, but that's why I'm like praising this one, and I'm like, oh, this one's normal for me at least. But again, you know, look at the flow. Again, something people don't really, I think, recognize, especially because the anime is static, especially non-OVAs. So like, this is Star Platinum's hair, right? Like, it's very wavy, it's very flowy, it's very like dramatic. It's supposed to be like moving dramatically almost, but in the anime it just looks like he has Goku hair because they're not going to animate every single freaking, you know, frame of Star Platinum's hair undulating in the wind. Like they're not going to do that. Ain't nobody got the budget for that. For a Star Platinum hair budget. But because you don't have to pay for that here, this is, you know, whoosh, whoosh. Again, I would have gone wider with this. I think you will later on because this is a new scene. This is very Araki. He started doing a gaga, right? That's the sound effect, and this very, very. So this is something that exemplifies traditional composition because you have the lines, the gesture lines, which are again basically foreshortening lines. The speed lines, so to speak, are coming in like this. So the focal point is somewhere around here, which if you notice, there's a wheel, there's a circle right in the middle there. All right, what'd I tell you? It might just be a coincidence. He might have used a reference photo, but I like to think it's because it grounds the image. It's very powerfully grounding. And then there's verticalness. So you have, you know, dramatic verticality, and in fact it's even more dramatic because it's sloping upward. So there's all this motion that leads the eye to basically want to stop right in the frickin' middle of the page, because you have up down motion here, and so you're already traveling up and down, and then you have motion coming in from like the gesture lines here, which mean, you know, you're coming in this way and you're moving up and down, and then there's a little bit of extra, you know, drama coming in from the plane implied by the overhang, so that everything is just like your eye wants to stop like right there, essentially, and it makes it really freaking dramatic. And I don't know if he consciously knows that, but he definitely intuitively knows that, at least. Like, he did this intentionally, one way or another. And this is actually why I kind of like this is where it kind of doesn't work sometimes. The reason why is because he had to draw the carriage in front. And if he didn't have the carriage, this panel would actually be extremely, extremely arresting. But because the carriage is in front and the carriage has its own planes, right? It has its own foreshortening. Like, it's drawing your attention. So here's like the box shape, right? It's the top part of the carriage, and here's like the under part. But by the way, this is like dope drawing, right? Like, this is crazy amounts of effort. Like, dude, like all this for like a freaking buggy, like for real? But yeah, he did it because that's Araki's ethos. It's just like, if you can't figure out what to do, then just draw it well at least, and then add drama. But look at those planes, right? So that's coming into like here. That's coming into like the horses, and that has nothing to do with those background lines. Like, totally nothing to do with those lines. And that's part of why this carriage has to be outlined with white, all this white here, because it has nothing to do with that background image, and it kind of competes because it creates two focal points and they're kind of competing with each other. And but he needed to show the carriage, or he wanted to show the carriage. I bet what he did is I bet he drew the background, and I bet he drew it really fun and dramatically, and then he had to draw the carriage on top, and he just slapped the carriage on top, and he was just like, okay, well, whatever, you know, and you just like roll with it. Ideally, I think he probably would have redrawn it a little differently. And in fact, if you look at the colored scans, I bet he did something to create two different planes for the house and the carriage, so that it's more, so that you get both of the fun. You get the fun of both of the foreshortenings, because as it is, they sort of collide, especially in these scans, being the quality that they are. They kind of there's just way so much light and shadow and shininess and all these like different things coming out all over the place. It's really hard to just sink into the motion of the image itself. At least for me. I mean, it's just like, it's really shiny. Wheel memes. I don't know. It's just a wheel. It's a wheel. Look at the outline, because look at those line weights. Look at that. See? Black, fat, black lines. And it's just, boom, it's in the foreground, baby. And this is slightly thinner because, hey, we're spokes positioned in a wheel slightly inside. They're not on the same plane as the actual wheel itself. They're not on the spokes hit the interior. So the lines are a little thinner for the spokes. Jonathan's walking back he's just this is just to place Jonathan in the scene. Honestly, this is like establishing shot. Where's Jonathan? So same thing as the deal earlier, right? Like here's the scene, here's the actor. This is just a placeholder. Again, it's like a little flare, a little trill. It's just to like bridge white space. This is interesting though, right? So this is where I think Araki really starts to build his understanding of suspense and action, like that kind of flow. And this is what he's really, really good at. And this is why I think the manga is amazing and like way better than the anime. Is so earlier, right? You remember, man, this is like way freaking earlier. No, okay. So earlier, remember, right? He established a scene, and then he showed you the object of focus, and then he showed you like the relationship between the two things that will be doing things, and then Dio has his monologue, and then he acts, and then something happens, right? And also this is a classic setup from like dramatic Gekiga, the noir stories, right? But here he's already primed you to kind of expect the same thing, right? He did that with the arena shot too, right? He did the setup, and then oh my god, where is it? Was it on the same page? No, it was not. There's no way it was on the same. Yeah, here it is. Yeah, so he did the setup. He set up the players. He set up their relationship, and then he acted them out, right? He kept doing that, and it follows like this little rhythm. Here, he sets the scene. He puts the kind of the object relationship, which is Jonathan and the carriage, and then the next thing you would expect is to be a shot of Jonathan like doing something with the carriage. It'd be a relationship with the carriage. Instead, you get this giant freaking like full shot of a carriage. It's almost the entire page. And it's super freaking dramatic too. And so there's two things I want to point out here from the comics perspective is, remember, these are pages. So you're reading this, and like this is laid out in front of you. You read this page, and this is like, and you turn and you're reading this, and you're like, okay, this is cool. That's like a nice, pretty house. That's interesting. Okay, he's walking over here, and then you turn the page, and boom, you're hit with this all of a sudden. It just comes out of nowhere. It's like horses and like carriage, and you're like, what the hell? This giant, it literally says "bam." It makes the sound effect I just made essentially, and like. The horses are freaking, I mean, you want to talk about gesture and foreshortening. So here's something, right? Like, look at the way these horses are freaking drawn. Their heads are here, right? And in order for that to like work with everything it is, and this does work, is their bodies are implied to be doing like here's horses, right? Horse memes. Here's the neck, here's like their shoulders, their legs have to be doing something like, oh my, what is this really gonna do this to me? Their legs have to be doing something like this, like here, and like I'm just drawing like blue horse, right? Blue horse face. The leg is coming back here, the butt is over there, the hindquarters is there, this and these are the legs down here, right? That's how dramatically foreshortened that horse is implied to be just from that panel. Like that's how like dramatically that horse is coming towards you. In order to experience this shot in real life, which is what a lot of like art is about, you'd have to be standing like literally under the horse itself. And if you pull off this gesture, if you understand the foreshortening like Araki does here, you can convey that sense. And he does. It's like you turn the page and you're hit with the, oh my god, it's like you're about to be run over by a bunch of horses. And he just hits you with it. And he hits you with it out of nowhere, especially because, again, he set up the rhythm earlier here to be much slower and with way less dramatic payoff. Whereas like that, like really, like this is the most drama you get. This is the most motion you get. But here, it's like, oh my god, it's like horses for days, like slow panels, and then boom, horse shot. You're like, whoa, and then he rides that again because he's built your tension, and so your heart's already racing, right? Or you're supposed to be. I mean, it's just, again, the ideal reader. Your heart is racing from here, and then something mysterious happens. You're like, what is that? What is this briefcase? It's ominous. And then. And this is like this. Okay, and this is just Jojo. This is like Araki's like, how much time do I really want to spend revealing Dio Brando getting out from a horse carriage? And And so he just pops him out. He's like, boom, and then he wants to move the story along. And you notice he does this sometimes in the plot too, when he's just like, look, we can't spend any more time on this. This is like, I'm done. I don't want to draw this anymore, or like this isn't interesting anymore. He just throws in like a full body pose shot to just get it over with, and it's like, oh, it's nice, it's fun, and move on, essentially. So he does the drama and he sets it all up, and he's like, yeah, and he's like, all right, like I got like 3 pages left of this thing. We got to move it along. We got to get Dio out here, and he does. And he throws Dio out here on the page, and it's a fun classic thing. And hey, look, it's our old friend cross contour lines. Yeah, and told you that's why he's got these ridiculous clown socks. Because artists love them cross contours. But yeah, so he just pops out. It's fun. It's just Jojo, and he gives it a full panel here because that's his philosophy. Like, if you can't figure out what to do, just own it. Just walk the walk. Just do the pose, and don't hide it. Just make it a feature, a focal point, and let people just enjoy it. And so he does. He enjoys it. He just gives you a full body shot. He's like, screw it. What actually does this is Shoujo manga does a lot of the stuff too, but instead of doing full body like weird, interesting, objectively interesting poses, they do more like subjective, emotionally interesting like reactions. So they want you to indulge in like the feeling of the moment, or someone dancing. They'll just give you a full shot of that because they want you to indulge in that. And Araki, in this case, he's like, no, I want you to indulge in like how bizarre, right, this is, right, how unusual, like what the hell, kind of thing. And sure enough, he falls down and he's just like, just make it cool, right? Jumps down, whoosh, and his hair flies back. It's just dramatic. It's dramatic for no reason. There's no reason for Dio to be this dramatic, especially when he looks just like Jonathan. But it's just for funsies. It's because why not? Just indulge in the moment. It's the same reason Devil May Cry, like Dante jumps through stained glass windows and he like skateboards on demon faces and he throws motorcycles at people, because it's just fun. It's just like, why not? Oh, and this is a gesture thing too. Remember anticipation and execution. So in this case, the actual thing that's going to be moving is the head, and there's already implied motion because of these lines that's coming back. But the actual space it could occupy, based on that motion, if it follows through, is all of that space back there. It's like all of that space, because that's where because the head pivots on the neck. So right here is the pivot point. It's actually kind of like there's like 2 pivot points, because the neck is like, it's like a whip almost. That's why you get like whiplash. It's got 2 articulation points. So the articulation points are like there and there. So the point is like, if he's moving this way, right? If he's moving like there, the head at any point would stop here, and then it would pivot like there would be 1, or it could go like, if it stopped here, it could pivot like that. And by pivot, I mean the head would snap back. That sounds very violent, but you know what I'm saying. Like it would pop back there, or it would pop back there, using this or this as the major pivot points. And that's exactly what happens here, essentially. He does draw the positioning so that he's not like breaking his own neck, but the implied motion is that he's snapping his head back, which is why his hair is flying up here. So again, that's just understanding how the human body works and manipulating it in space, and being able to do that from panel to panel, from knowing that you're going here, and then this is an intense motion from here to here, because you understand how the body pivots. And here we go. We're about to hit the we almost there. This is again the same pose that Dio had earlier, just showing that Araki does have his favorite poses. In fact, this is a pose that Dio will do frequently throughout the scene. I know this is not Dio, but I'm saying this is a pose that Araki likes to do. Remember, profile, acontextual. Like these guys aren't even like he's remembering Jonathan based on if you took the scene extremely literally. But again, this little paneling here is supposed to be the midground. It's supposed to imply he's in the foreground, he's the midground, and here's him in the background, even though the angles are totally incorrect in the profile, and Dio's looking all the way over there. It's just totally not at all correct positioning in space. But it's fine. You get the point, because everything was set up. Because that the carriage was here, that Dio got out of the carriage, and that Jonathan was walking up to it. So that this is roughly their positioning. Anyway. Little B. This is just... I would even just call this a mistake. I think he drew a different panel here and literally plastered it on afterwards. I'm not even sure. But... yeah. I just this is just like a weird filler panel that I think it was he drew something in that he had to white out afterwards, and then he drew this panel on top, because it's just like a weird I need to put in exposition. And this is important. This is important here because it is they're actually mirrored here. What that means is if you took this panel and you Control C, and you Control V'd it, and then you flipped it. If I could, where's my flip? I just Control C, right, and then flipped it. Yeah, they're almost identical positioning, right? And that's important, because what you could have is you could actually do eyeline matching, right? So if they did, if he drew a pupil and it were here, and there was a pupil here, so two pupils there, and there was a pupil here, and a pupil here. I know it's hard to see because it's green, but the point is if their eye lines matched, right, there, then they would look like more directly like rivals. It would look like an iShield 21 panel. It would look like they're directly challenging each other. But instead, because they're mirrored, and this is something that again is very classic, because they're mirrored, and this expresses the relationship between the two characters, which is that they're reflections of each other, and they're supposed to be sort of these competing ideals of what someone is supposed to be. They're not something as sort of human as direct rivals thrown into a circumstance. They're actually almost like Greek ideals of people that are supposed to represent opposing images. So that's a really cool thing, and it's important to note that he in order to accomplish this, he drew them at the same angle but opposing, flipped, and with roughly the same proportions, and everything is just sort of, their features are generally mirrored. As opposed to something like Ippo, when they do challengers, they do one character will be they'll be their eyeline will be here, and then another character will be here. So that's the eyeline there, and then another eyeline for Ippo would be here, and the head would be something like that. And George Morikawa does that too. They would be expressing their personality. Jonathan would be the challenger, and he'd be and he'd be looking up at Dio, and Dio would be looking down at him because he's haughty, which is something that does come up later. But for right now, they're just supposed to be rivals, and they're supposed to be these titanic reflections of each other, and so they're reflections. Everyone here calls me Jojo. Well, name drop. Take a shot. And yeah, this is just I don't know. This is just filler stuff. This is weird stuff. This is a cool akimbo angle. This is something that. So if you notice so far, like we talked about here, Araki does angles, but he does single angles, and when he stacks them, he doesn't stack them super accurately, I would say. But instead here, and when he does it, he does flat angles. You notice, even this is dramatic, but the ground plane is flat. The ground plane is generally flat in all of these things, right? Everyone, you're looking at it. The camera, if you were to imagine there were a camera, is stationed firmly on the ground. here is like the most dramatic you've gotten so far, and even then it's just kind of like maybe in a tree. But here, this is something he gets better at later on, and who he does more of later on, is look, it's tilted. It's dramatic. It's fun. It's not just a dog running up with a little bit of foreshortening there. Boop, 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 boop. Right? There's just a little bit of that leg coming forward there. You can actually see it really nicely there. It's also that it's tilted, so the dog is in motion, and fun stuff like this, and this is why it's cool to just look at this stuff digitally and see what's happening, is you can tilt it, right, and see what it would look like if it were just, normally on a ground plane. And you'll see it doesn't quite work the same. I mean, okay, so it's hard to tell because now it just looks like I plastered on, right, like a sticker. But let me fill that background with white, and you'll see that maybe a little bit. So you get this, the dog just doesn't seem to be moving as much into the foreground, and the sense of motion towards everything it's just a little different. But when it's in its original form, like it's tilted like this, Danny seems to really be running right at you. There's like a really greater sense, because what's happening is he's curving the whole motion. So the whole motion is actually like here. This is kind of wrong. There. It's like there and there and there. So it's hard to do with straight line segments, but it's a curve. He's curving towards the camera, and that's something that you see in anime actually a lot of days is this shot right here, this specific shot, this low angle shot when they want to show something curving. So like Prince of Tennis, where like they're smacking the tennis ball and it's like curving low to the ground. I don't know, I don't watch Prince of Tennis, but anything that's moving low to the ground and comes into the foreground they usually bend it like that. And so they show this akimbo angle, this tilted angle, this diagonal angle to emphasize that curve, because it feels like you're swerving. This is broken up a bit here. And this is, I think this is probably because this is where they put the title, right? Jojo no Kimi no Boken, right? And this is just a description. So I think this panel is intentionally drawn sort of statically to be, this is the title and this is what it's about initially, which is about Dio and Jonathan. Because this is also very like static. Although you can still see him trying to break out, that knee's coming into the foreground. Look at this classic Dio, man. He looked like Dio even back here. He's got the frickin' that thing and his cape's flowing backward. Motion, Oh, and look at those the pants. So this is what I was talking about too. The flow of motion in Araki's stuff cannot be understated. He swoops in here. I'm drawing on the actual thing. So he swoops in here, and you can see that by looking at the. You can see that by looking at the actual. Wrinkles, the clothing wrinkles. He's swerving up. The swerve carries up here into the shoulder, or it's carried down into the arm, and then the back line is expressed by a swooping motion outwards, which comes out into like a little cape, which is, it's his cloak. It's his jacket, but it looks like a cape. And this is hard to see because the scans are not great, but the elbow is receding into the background too, and it all comes down here. So the line of motion is like there. That's the line of motion. That's a lot of motion in just a single character that's like just standing there. Like he's not even that. Look how he's not even that big. But that's how Araki likes to draw that form. He does that motion stuff. There's some motion going on Jonathan too, like he's boop, he's coming in like this. But I just want to point out, because Dio, all throughout part 3 and as the series goes on, is basically expressed by this pose and this amount of tension, such that every time you see Dio, this is why everyone goes like, Jojo, and they meme Dio because he's super dramatic. And obviously part of it is because every time he shows up, the camera closes up on his face and he shouts Jojo's name. But also part of it is because every time he shows up, he's posed like this. There's so much drama and motion just in the way he stands. every time he shows up, he's just freaking like super dramatic, and it starts even here. That's all I'm saying, baby. So yeah, and then you got Danny the dog. I mean, he's just running up, and this is really the important part here, honestly. And this is the same way Kira is menacing in part 4 as well. You'll notice it doesn't really matter where the space is. Any of that stuff doesn't matter. And this is, again, because he knows drama. Where's the drama? The drama's in the figures. The drama's coming in their interaction. It doesn't really matter where the ground ends or begins or any of that stuff. Even though if he wants to, he can draw it. And boom, that's why. Because we're at the dog page. And again, what's the drama? The drama is a big honking foreshortened knee slamming into the dog's face. This knee is nowhere near in the correct position, right? Like none of this is like this leg is like insano, but that doesn't matter because it's not about that, and you understand exactly what's going on, which is like Dio is like destroying this dog's face and its teeth with his knee, and it's just because it looks so dramatic because again, it's drawn from foreground to background, so you have this big old leg, and the shading is really heavy in the front. Everything is really shaded out well, so it looks very realistic, and you have these speed lines breaking the line of motion, showing you how strong it is. And you remember how I said earlier, sometimes it's better to just show the point of impact after the motion or before the impact. Well, Araki knows when to show the impact, and it's often when the impact itself is a point of interest, not just the how intense it was, not just like how hard they were hit, but the mere fact of the hit itself. The mere fact that he's kneeing a dog in the face is important enough to show the point of impact, essentially. And when you do show the point of impact, you kind of have to do these things he's doing here, which is you have these. Notice all these little spots, right? These little spots, and some of it's supposed to be like spittle and teeth and blood. But that's because when you show something like this, you're implied to be taking like a high-speed photo, essentially. You're implied to be taking a snapshot because that's how these sorts of motions are captured. Humans summarize motions as fluid things. So if you're going to show a motion in the middle of time, it's more effective to show a contrast between the thing moving and the things that are statically floating, essentially, in space. And that's why you'll see in a lot of artwork, when you show the moment of impact of something, like just like when you're watching slow motion videos of like them shooting through jello or something like that, or smacking a watermelon with a bat, what really makes it feel like it's like splattering and stuff like that is you'll see all these little droplets suspended in space in a moment in time, and it's somehow that the suspension also creates the understanding that the overall impact is happening. And it's a summary of the overall impact. Also, this dog has human fingers. It's very strange. But again, it's not about verisimilitude, right? It's not about how accurate it is to anatomy. It's about the drama. Drama chameleon. Yeah. And then this is like, how do you follow it up, right? You can't really. So it's just like, it's really simple. Nothing too dramatic because this is already intense enough. So he just kind of plays you out with like these really simple faces that are obviously what we're reacting to. We're obviously reacting this way to Danny getting blasted in the face by Dio's knee. And so he plays us out with a very simple face so that we're like, oh man, we get our own time to process. We don't get immediately drawn into a really intense, like super hyper detailed eye shot of like Jonathan or anything like that. We get time for this to play out in our head. And righteous anger. I mean, this is just manga. This is like Kenshiro. This is like everybody. This is just like Kenshiro Manga 101. The thing to note though is, again, there's a fist in the foreground and the face is in the background, and just this little detail again creates a bit of a sense of depth. It's not just Jonathan reacting, which is down here. He's reacting in ambiguous space. He's specifically clenching his fist in a moment of in a space. In a relationship to Dio, essentially. He's standing in front of Dio and clenching his fist because there's an object in the foreground and he's in the background, so there's a sense of space created. And this is actually like the end of the manga. Like, so the next page is the end. So what's interesting to note here is he ends with these big, fat, dramatic panels that are also very wide, because you got this, which is like really intense, and then he wants you to get really excited and really hyped up, and you're like, oh man, here we go. And you get these fat panels where he's just like, oh, clenching his fist, and there's all this anger, and you get this fat panel here where it deals like, I'm gonna destroy him, I must destroy him mentally. You know, it's like this big like prize fight coming up, and then of course a shot of like the reason for fighting, which is like Danny literally spazzing on the ground from being kicked, and that's just to get you hyped up for the to be continued. You know, it's just like you have big anticipation, and so what happens is, this is something that's kind of hard to pull off. You see manga do it nowadays, and the way they end up doing it is they tell a lot of story in the interim. They tell like a lot of random stuff, like Promised Neverland does this a lot. They tell like a lot of exposition in this period, right, all the pages beforehand, and then at the very, very end, they just sort of start cutting together panels really quickly and end with like a really big dramatic shot. Because and then and the next chapter starts with like a resolution of that really quickly, because they're just trying to like, it's like an afterthought, like it's like a semicolon, you know, like that's how they end their thing. Jojo ends with a hyphen, essentially, like every single time. That's why the to be continued thing is the way it is, because it's like there is no end of drama. The every page to page is drama, every scene to scene is drama, and he's playing it up right here. This is chapter 1, and it's already just like you are literally in the middle of thick drama at the end of the chapter. It's just like really, really thick drama. There's no like specific to be continued. He's not about to kick Danny. He already kicked Danny. Like there's drama. They're in the middle of beef. And then, boop, to be continued. So, all right. Yeah, it's pretty typical. And then last thing here is, of course, using the spotlight to show emphasis on Danny and that's weather stuff. So big takeaways from the chapter overall are just the foreshortening that takes place for drama, the gesture that flows through all of the figures here. You have the foreground, midground, background that makes up for when the perspectives don't line up, and the use of light to illuminate what stuff doesn't necessarily, and of course all the other little observations. But those are the main takeaways, I think, that are really showing even in the early Jojo style, and that really carry through as the main theme of Araki's work, even all the way through to today. You know, you can still look at his manga today. You can open up JoJolion and you will still see these same elements, because they're what define his style. And that is it, baby. So there you go, chapter 1, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Phantom Blood. That is how you put together early JoJo, chapter 1.